103 AC, King Jaehaerys Targaryen
died in his bed as Lady Alicent Hightower was reading to him from Septon Bard's Unnatural History. Jaehaerys was 69 years of age and had reigned over the Seven Kingdoms since coming to the Iron Throne at the age of 14, in accordance with his own wishes and the decree of the Great Council of 101 AC. His grandson Viserys succeeded him, mounting the Iron Throne as King Viserys Targaryen. At the time of his ascent, King Viserys was 26 years old. He had been married for a decade to a cousin, Lady Aemma of House Arryn, herself also a granddaughter of Jaehaerys and good Queen Alysanne through her mother, the late Princess Daela, who died giving birth to her. Lady Aemma had suffered several miscarriages and the death of one son in the cradle over the course of her marriage, but she had also given birth to a healthy daughter, Rhaenyra, born in 97 AC. The new king and his queen both doted on the girl as their only living child. Many consider the reign of Viserys Targaryen to represent the apex of Targaryen power in Westeros. Beyond doubt, there were more lords and princes claiming the blood of the dragon than any other period of history, though the Targaryens had continued their traditional practice of marrying brother to sister, uncle to niece, and cousin to cousin wherever possible. There had also been important matches outside the royal family, the fruits of which would play important roles in the wars to come. There were also more dragons in Westeros than ever before, and the most since the fall of Valyria, and several of these dragons were regularly producing clutches of eggs. It became a tradition for the fathers and mothers of newborn princelings to place a dragon's egg in their cradle. It's a tradition that Princess Rhaenyra had started many years before. The children, blessed with dragon blood, hatched the eggs and bonded with the hatchlings to become dragon riders. Viserys Targaryen had a generous and amicable nature and was well loved by his lords and small folk alike. The reign of the young king, as the commons called him upon his ascent, was peaceful and prosperous. His open-handedness was legendary throughout the realm, and the Red Keep became a place of song and splendour. King Viserys and Queen Aemma hosted many feasts and tourneys and lavished gold, offices and honours on their favourite lords. At the centre of all of this, cherished and adored by all, was their only surviving child, Princess Rhaenyra. The courts dubbed the little girl the realm's delight. Though she was only 6 when her father came to the Iron Throne, Rhaenyra Targaryen was a precocious child, bright and bold and beautiful as only one of dragon's blood can be. At 7, she became a dragon rider, taking to the sky on a young dragon she named Syrax, after a goddess of old Valyria. At 8, the princess was placed into service as a cupbearer, but for her own father, the king. At table, at tourney, at court, King Viserys thereafter was seldom seen without his daughter by his side. Meanwhile, the tedium of rule was left largely to the king's council and his hand. Sir Otto Hightower had continued in that office after the death of Jaehaerys, a very able hand, all agreed, though many found him proud, brusque, and haughty. The longer he served, the more imperious Sir Otto became, and many great lords and princes came to resent his manner and envy him his access to the Iron Throne. The greatest of his rivals was Daemon Targaryen, the king's ambitious, impetuous, moody younger brother. As charming as he was hot-tempered, Prince Daemon had earned his knight's spurs at 16 and had been given Dark Sister, the Valyrian steel sword carried by Viserion Targaryen during the conquests. He was given the blade by the old king himself in recognition of his prowess. Though he had wed the Lady of Runestone in 97 AC during the old king's reign, the marriage had not been a success. Prince Daemon found the Vale of Arryn boring. He was once heard to say that in the Vale the men bed their sheep, but in truth you cannot fully blame them. Their sheep are prettier than their women. He developed a mislike for his lady wife, whom he called my bronze bitch, after the runic bronze armour worn by the lords of House Royce. Upon the accession of his brother to the Iron Throne, the prince petitioned to have his marriage set aside. Viserys denied the request, but did allow Daemon return to court, where he sat on the small council, serving as Master of Coin from 103 to 104 AC, and Master of Law for half a year in 104 AC. But governance bored Daemon. He did better when King Viserys made him commander of the city watch. Finding the watchmen ill-armed and clad in oddments and rags, Daemon equipped each man with a dirk, short sword and a cudgel, armoured then in black ribbed mail with breastplates for the officers, and gave them long golden cloaks that they might wear with pride around the city. Ever since, the men of the city watch have been known as gold cloaks. Prince Daemon took eagerly to the work of the gold cloaks, and often prowled the alleys at King's Landing with his men. That he made the city more orderly, no one could doubt, but his discipline was brutal. He delighted in cutting off hands of pickpockets, gelding rapists, and slitting the noses of thieves, and he killed 3 men in a street brawl during his first year as a commander. Before long, the prince was well known in all the low places of King's Landing. He became a familiar sight in the wine sinks, where he drank for free, and the gambling pits, where he always left with more coin than he had entered with. Though he sampled countless whores throughout the city's brothels, he was said to have a fondness for deflowering maidens. A certain Lysini dancing girl soon became his favourite. Marissa was the name she went by, though his rivals and enemies called her Misery, the White Worm. As King Viserys had no living sons, Daemon regarded himself as the rightful heir to the Iron Throne, and coveted the title of Prince of Dragonstone, which King Viserys refused to grant him. But by the end of the year 105 AC, he was well known to his friends as the Prince of the City, and to the small folk as Lord Fleabottom. Though the king did not wish Daemon to succeed him, he remained fond of his younger brother, and was quick to forgive many of his offences. Princess Rhaenyra was also enamoured of her uncle, for Daemon was ever attentive to her. Whenever he crossed the narrow sea upon his dragon, he brought her some exotic gift in return. The king had grown soft and plump over the years. Viserys never claimed another dragon after Balerion the Black-Dread's death, nor did he have much taste for jousting, or hunting, or swordplay, whereas Prince Daemon excelled in all of these spheres, and seemed all that his brother was not, lean and hard, and a renowned warrior, dashing, daring, and more than a little dangerous. For the events that are to follow, there are 3 key sources of information. Septon Eustace, who served the royal sept in the Red Keep much of this time, and later rose to the ranks of the most devout. He set down the most detailed history of this period. We also have the testimony of Mushroom, based upon the verbal account of the court fool who at various times was the amusement of King Viserys, Princess Rhaenyra, and both Aegons, the second and third. A 3-foot-tall dwarf, he possessed an enormous head. Mushroom was thought feebly minded, so kings and lords and princes alike did not scruple to hide their secrets from him. Grand Maester Runciter and his later successors, court records, provide the last key source of information. One point Mushroom, Septon Eustace, and Grand Maester Runciter, and all other sources agree on, is that Sir Otto Hightower, the king's hand, took a great dislike to the king's brother Daemon. It was Sir Otto who convinced Viserys to remove Prince Daemon as Master of Coin, and then as Master of Law. These actions the hand soon came to regret. As commander of the City Watch, with 2,000 men under his command, Daemon was more powerful than ever. On no account can Prince Daemon be allowed to ascend to the Iron Throne, Hand wrote to his brother, the Lord of Old Town. He would be a second Maegor the Cruel, or worse. It was Sir Otto's wish at the time that Princess Rhaenyra succeed her father, yet his party foreseemed a formidable hurdle. If the precedent set by the Great Council of 101 AC was to be followed, a male claimant must prevail over a female. In the absence of a trueborn son, the king's brother, in this case Daemon, would come before the king's daughter, Rhaenyra, as Balon the Brave had come before Princess Rhaenys in 92 AC. As for the king's own view, all the chronicles agree that King Viserys hated dissension. Though far from blind to his brother's flaws, he cherished his memories of the free-spirited, adventurous young boy that Daemon had been. His daughter was his life's great joy. He often said, but a brother is brother. Time and time again he strove to make peace between Daemon and Sir Otto. The enmity between the two men rolled endlessly between the false smiles they wore at court. When pressed upon the matter, King Viserys would only say that he was certain the Queen would soon present him with a son. In 105 AC, he announced to the court and the small council that Queen Aemma was once again with child, and the king was sure that this issue of succession would soon be resolved for good.
But unbeknownst to all, this was far, far from the case. During the fateful year of 105 AC,
Sir Criston Cole was appointed to the King's Guard to fill the place created by the death of the legendary Sir Ryan Redwyne. Sir Criston was a comely young knight of 23. He first came to the attention of the court when he won the melee held at Maidenpool in the honour of King Viserys' ascension. In the final moments of the fight, Sir Criston knocked Dark Sister from Prince Daemon's hand with his Morning Star, to the delight of his grace and the fury of the prince. Afterwards, he gave the 7-year-old Princess Rhaenyra the victor's laurel and begged for her favour to wear in the joust. In the lists, he defeated Prince Daemon once again, and unhorsed both the celebrated Cogley twins of the Kingsguard, before falling to Lord Lyman Mallister. With his pale green eyes, coal-black hair, and easy charm, Cole soon became a favourite of all the ladies at court, not the least amongst them Rhaenyra Targaryen herself. So smitten was she by the charm of the man she called my White Knight, that Rhaenyra begged her father to name Sir Criston her own personal shield and protector. The king indulged her in this, as in so much else. Thereafter, Sir Criston always wore her favour in the lists, and became a fixture at her side during feasts. Not long after Sir Criston donned his white cloak, King Viserys invited Lionel Strong, Lord of Harrenhal, to join the small council was Master of Law, a big man, burly and balding. Lord Strong enjoyed a formidable reputation as a battler. Those who did not know him often took him for a brute, mistaking his silence and slowness of speech for stupidity. This was far from the truth, however. Lord Laenor had studied at the Citadel in his youth, earning 6 links of his chain before deciding that a maester's life was not for him. He was literate and learned, his knowledge of the law of the 7 kingdoms exhaustive. Thrice wed and thrice widowed, the Lord of Harrenhal brought 2 maiden daughters and 2 sons to court with him. The girls became handmaidens to Princess Rhaenyra, while the elder brother, Sir Harwin Strong, called Breakbones, was made a captain in the Gold Cloaks. The younger boy, Larys the Clubfoot, joined the king's confessors. Thus did matters stand in the King's Landing late in 105 AC, when Queen Aemma was brought to bed in Maegor's holdfast and died whilst giving birth to the son that Viserys Targaryen had desired for so long. The boy, named Balon after the king's father, survived her only by a day, leaving the king and court bereft, save perhaps from Prince Daemon, who was observed in a brothel on the Street of Silk making drunken jokes with his high-born cronies about the heir for a day. When word of this got back to King Viserys, he became livid. His grace had finally had enough of his ungrateful brother and his ambitions. Once his mourning for his wife and son had run its course, the king moved swiftly to resolve the long-simmering issue of the succession. Disregarding the precedent set by King Jaehaerys in 92 AC and the Great Council in 101 AC, Viserys declared his daughter Rhaenyra to be his rightful heir and named her Princess of Dragonstone. In a lavish ceremony at King's Landing, hundreds of lords gathered as Rhaenyra sat at her father's feet at the base of the Iron Throne, swearing to honour and defend her right of succession. Prince Daemon was not amongst them. Furious at the king's decree, the prince quit King's Landing, resigning from the city watch. He went first to Dragonstone, taking his paramour, Marissa, with him, upon the back of his dragon Caraxes, the lean red beast the small folk called the Bloodworm. There he remained for half a year, during which time he got Marissa with child. When he learned she was pregnant, Prince Daemon presented her with dragon eggs, but in this, Daemon once again went too far and woke his brother's wrath. King Viserys commanded him to return the dragon eggs, send his whore away, and return to his lawful wife, or else be attainted as a traitor. The prince obeyed, though with ill grace, dispatching Marissa, eggless, back to Lys, while he himself flew to Runestone in the Vale, and to the unwelcome company of his wife. But Marissa lost her child during a storm on the narrow sea. When word reached Prince Daemon, he spoke no syllable of grief, but his heart hardened against the king, his brother. Thereafter he spoke of the King Viserys only with disdain, and began to brood day and night on the succession. Though Princess Rhaenyra had been proclaimed her father's successor, there were many in the realm, at court, and beyond it, who still hoped that Viserys might father a male heir, for the young king was not yet 30. Grand Maester Runster was the first to urge Viserys to remarry, even suggesting a suitable choice, the Lady Laena Velaryon, who had just turned 12. A fiery young maiden, freshly flowered, Lady Laena had inherited the beauty of a true Targaryen from her mother, Princess Rhaenys, the daughter of his uncle, Aemond. She also possessed a bold and adventurous spirit from her father, Corlys Velaryon the Sea Snake. As Lord Corlys loved to sail, Laena loved to fly, and acclaimed for her own no less of a mount than the mighty Vhagar, the oldest and largest of the Targaryen dragons since the passing of the Black Dread in 94 AC. By taking the girl to wife, King could heal the rift that had grown between the Iron Throne and Driftmark, and Laena would surely make a splendid queen. But Viserys the First Targaryen was not the strongest-willed of kings, it must be said. Always amiable and anxious to please, he relied greatly on the counsel of the men around him, and he did as they bade more often than not. In this instance, however, his grace had his own notion, and no amount of argument would sway him from his course. Yes, he would marry again, but not a 12-year-old girl, and not for reasons of state. Another woman had caught his eye. He announced his intention to wed Lady Alicent of House Hightower, the clever and lovely 18-year-old daughter of the hand, the girl who had read to King Jaehaerys as he lay dying. The Hightowers of Oldtown were an ancient and noble family, of impeccable lineage. There could be no possible objection to the king's choice of bride. Even so, there were those who murmured that the hand had risen above himself, that he had brought his daughter to court with this exact notion in mind. A few even cast doubt on Lady Alicent's virtue, suggesting she had welcomed King Viserys into her bed even before Queen Aemma's death. These claims were never proven and had very little evidence, though Mushroom repeats them in his testimony and goes far as to claim that the reading was not the only service Lady Alicent performed for the old king in his bedchamber as he lay dying. In the Vale of Arryn, Prince Daemon reportedly whipped the serving man who brought the news to him within an inch of his life. Nor was the sea snake pleased when word reached Driftmark. House Velaryon had once again been passed over, his daughter Laena scorned, just as his son Laenor had been by the Great Council, and his wife by the Old King back in 92 AC. Only Lady Laena herself seemed untroubled. Her ladyship shows far more interest in flying than in boys, the Maester of Hightower wrote to the Citadel. When King Viserys took Alicent Hightower to wife in 106 AC, House Velaryon was notable for his absence. Princess Rhaenyra poured for her stepmother at the feast, and Queen Alicent kissed her and named her daughter. The princess was among the women who disrobed the king and delivered him to the bedchamber of his bride. Laughter and love ruled the Red Keep that night, whilst across Blackwater Bay, Lord Corlys, the sea snake, welcomed the king's brother, Prince Daemon, to a war council. The prince had suffered all he could stand at the Vale of Arryn, Runestone, and his wife. Dark Sister was made for a nobler task than slaughtering sheep. He was reported to have told the Lord of the Tides, "She has a thirst for blood." But it was not rebellion that the prince had in mind. He saw another path to power, a way to carve out his own petty kingdom to spite his brother, and Corlys Velaryon was more than happy to assist Daemon Targaryen in this, and the sea snake and the rogue prince set sail together with their eyes firmly set on the Stepstones. The Stepstones, the chain of rocky islands between Dorne and the disputed lands of Essos, had long been the haunt of outlaws, exiles, wreckers, and pirates. Of themselves, the isles were little of worth, but placed as they were, they can control the sea lanes to and from the narrow sea, and merchant ships passing through those waters were often preyed upon by the inhabitants. Still, for centuries such depredations have remained no more than a nuisance. 10 years earlier, however, the free cities of Lys, Myr and Tyrosh had put aside their ancient enmities to make common cause in the war against Volantis. After defeating the Volantines in the Battle of the Borderland, the three victorious cities entered into an internal alliance and formed a strong new power, the Triarchy, better known in Westeros as the Kingdom of the Three Daughters, as each of the three cities considered itself a daughter of Valyria. This so-called kingdom was without a true king, being governed by a council of 33 magisters. Once Volantis sued for peace and withdrew from the disputed lands, and the three daughters had turned their gaze westward, sweeping over the Stepstones with their combined armies and fleets, under the command of Myrish Prince Admiral, who had earned the title of Pragas Crabbeater when he staked out hundreds of the captured pirates on the wet sands to drown beneath the rising tides. And it was now the turn of Daemon Targaryen and Corlys Velaryon
to stake their claim to these lands. The conquest and annexation of the Stepstones
by the Kingdom of the Three Daughters at first met with only approval from the Lords of Westeros. Order had replaced chaos, and if the Three Daughters demanded a toll of any ship passing through their waters, that seemed a small price to pay to be rid of the pirates. However, the barbaric actions of Pragas Crabbeater and his partners in conquest soon turned feelings against them. The toll demanded was raised again and again, soon becoming so much that merchants who once paid it gladly now sought to slip past the galleys of the Triarchy as once they had the pirates. The infighting between the three sisters only made the matters worse. Of all the lords of Westeros, none suffered more from these practices as much as Lord Corlys Velaryon, Lord of the Tides, whose fleet had made him as wealthy and powerful as any man in the Seven Kingdom, even raising him for a time above the Lannisters of Castle Rock. The sea snake was determined to put an end to the Triarchy's rule over the Stepstones, and in Daemon Targaryen he found a willing partner, eager for gold and glory that victory in war would bring him. Shunning the king's wedding, they laid their plans at high tide on the Isle of Driftmark. Lord Velaryon would command the fleet, Prince Daemon the army. They would be greatly outnumbered by the forces of the Three Daughters, but the prince would also bring to battle the fires of his dragon, Caraxes, the Bloodworm. The fighting began in 106 AC. Prince Daemon had little difficulty assembling an army of landless adventurers and second sons, and won many victories during the first 2 years of the conflict. In 108 AC, when at last he came face to face with Pragas Crabbeater, he slew him single-handed and cut off his head with Dark Sister. King Viserys, doubtless pleased to be rid of his troublesome brother, supported his efforts with regular infusions of gold, and by 109 AC, Daemon Targaryen and his army of sellswords and cutthroats controlled all but 2 of the islands of the Stepstones, and the Sea Snake's fleet had taken a firm control of the waters between them. During this brief moment of victory, Prince Daemon declared himself King of the Stepstones and the Narrow Sea, and Lord Corlys placed a crown upon his head. But their petty kingdom was far from secure. The next year, the Kingdom of the Three Daughters dispatched a fresh invasion force under the command of a Tyroshi captain Targaryen named Rhaenyra, surely one of the most curious and flamboyant rogues in the annals of history, and Dawn joined the fight in alliance with the Triarchy. Fighting resumed. Though the Stepstones were engulfed in blood and fire, King Viserys and his court remained unperturbed. Let Daemon play at war, King Viserys is reported to have said. It keeps him out of trouble. Viserys was a man of peace, and during these years, King's Landing was an endless round of feasts, balls and tourneys, where mummers and singers heralded the birth of each new Targaryen princeling. Queen Alicent had soon proved to be as fertile as she was pretty. In 107 AC, she bore the king a healthy son, naming him Aegon after the Conqueror. 2 years later, she produced a daughter for the king, Helena. In 110 AC, she bore him a second son, Aemond, who was said to be half the size of his elder brother, but twice as fierce. Yet, Princess Rhaenyra continued to sit at the foot of the Iron Throne with her father when her father held court, and his grace began to bring her to meetings of the Small Council as well. Though many lords and knights sought her favour, the princess only had eyes for Sir Criston Cole, young champion of the Kingsguard, and her constant companion. Sir Criston protects the princess from her enemies. Who protects the princess from Sir Criston? Queen Alicent asked one day at court. The enmity between Alicent Hightower and her stepdaughter had proven short-lived, for both Rhaenyra and Alicent aspired to be the first lady of the realm, and though the queen had given the king not one but 2 male heirs, Viserys had done nothing to change the order of succession. The Princess of Dragonstone remained his acknowledged heir, with half the lords of Westeros sworn to defend her rights. Those who asked what of the ruling of the Great Council of 101 found their words falling on deaf ears. The matter had been decided, so far as King Viserys was concerned. It was not an issue his grace cared to revisit. Still, questions persisted, not least from Queen Alicent herself. Loudest among her supporters was her father, Sir Otto Hightower, Hand of the King. Pushed too far on the matter in 109 AC, Viserys stripped Sir Otto of his chain of office and named in his place Lord of Harrenhal, Lionel Strong. This hand will not hector me, his grace proclaimed. Even after Sir Otto had returned to Old Town, a Queen's party still existed at court, a group of powerful lords friendly to Queen Alicent and supportive of the rights of her sons. Against them was pitted the party of the princess. King Viserys loved both his wife and his daughter, and hated conflict and contention. He strove all his days to keep the peace between his women, and to please both with gifts and gold and honours. So long as he lived and ruled, and kept balance, the feasts and tourneys continued as before, and peace prevailed throughout the realm. Some with sharp eyes, who observed the dragons of one party snapping and spitting flames at the dragons of the other party whenever they chanced to pass near each other. In 111 AC, a great tourney was held at King's Landing on the 5th anniversary of the king's marriage to Queen Alicent. At the opening feast, the queen wore a green gown, whilst the princess dressed dramatically in Targaryen red and black. Note was taken, and thereafter it became the custom to refer to the greens and the blacks when talking of the queen's party and the party of the princess. In the tourney itself, the blacks had the much better of it when Sir Criston Cole, wearing Princess Rhaenyra's favour, unhorsed all of the queen's champions, including 2 of her cousins and her youngest brother, Sir Gawain Hightower. Yet there was one who wore neither green nor black, but rather gold and silver. Prince Daemon had at last returned to court, wearing a crown and styling himself King of the Narrow Sea. He appeared unannounced in the skies above King's Landing on his dragon, circling thrice around the tourney grounds. But when at last he came to the earth, he knelt before his brother and offered his crown as a token of his love and fealty. Viserys returned the crown and kissed Daemon on both cheeks, welcoming him home, and the lords and the commons sent up thousands of cheers as the sons of the Spring Prince were reconciled. Amongst cheering the loudest was Princess Rhaenyra, who was thrilled at the return of her favourite uncle and begged him to stay a while. The events that followed are hotly debated, but what is known is Prince Daemon did remain in King's Landing for half a year. He even resumed his seat on the Small Council, according to Grand Maester Runciter, but neither age nor exile had changed his nature. Daemon soon took up again with the old companions from the Gold Cloaks and returned to the establishments along the Street of Silk where he had been such a valued patron. Though he treated Queen Alicent with all courtesy due her station, there was no warmth between them, and men said that the prince was notably cool towards her children, especially his nephews, Aegon and Aemond, whose birth had pushed him still lower down the order of succession. Princess Rhaenyra was a different matter. Daemon spent long hours in her company, enthralling her with tales of his journeys and battles. He gave her pearls and silks and books, and even a jade tiara, said once to have belonged to the Empress of Laenor, read poems to her, dined with her, hawked with her, sailed with her, entertained her by making mock of the greens at court, the lip spittle fawning over Queen Alicent and her children. He praised her beauty, declaring her the fairest maid in all of the 7 kingdoms. uncle and niece began to fly together almost daily, racing Syrax and Caraxes to Dragonstone and back. Now, here is where our sources diverge. Grand Maester Runster says brothers quarrelled again, and Prince Daemon departed King's Landing to return to the Stepstones and his wars. Of the cause of the quarrel, he did not speak. Others assert that it was Queen Alicent's urging that Viserys and Daemon away, but Septon Eustace and Mushroom tell another tale, or rather, two such tales, each different from the other. Eustace, the less salacious of the two, writes that Prince Daemon seduced his niece, the princess, and claimed her maidenhood. When the lovers were discovered abed by Sir Arek Cargill of the Kingsguard and brought before the king, Rhaenyra insisted she was in love with her uncle and pleaded with her father for leave to marry him. King Viserys would not hear of it, however, and reminded his daughter that Prince Daemon already had a wife. In his wrath, he confined his daughter to her bedchambers, told his brother to depart, and commanded both of them never to speak of what happened. The tale told by Mushroom is far more depraved, as is often the case with his testimony. According to the dwarf, it was Sir Criston Cole the princess yearned for, not Prince Daemon. But Sir Criston was a true knight, noble and chaste, and mindful of his vows, and though he was in her company day and night, he never so much as kissed her, nor made any declaration of his love. When he looks at you, he sees the little girl you were, not the woman you have become, Daemon told his niece. But I can teach you how to make him see you as a woman. Daemon began giving her kissing lessons, if Mushroom is to be believed. From there, the prince went on to show his niece how to best touch a man to bring him pleasure. At night, he would smuggle her from her rooms, dressed as a page boy, and take her secretly to the brothels along the Street of Silk, where the princess could observe men and women in the act of love and learn more of these womanly arts from the harlots of King's Landing. Just how long these lessons continued, Mushroom does not say, but unlike Septon Eustace, he insists that Princess Rhaenyra remained a maiden, for she wished to preserve her innocence as a gift for her beloved. But when at last she approached her White Knight, using all she had learned, Sir Criston was horrified and spurned her. The whole tale came out, in no small part thanks to Mushroom himself. King Viserys at first refused to believe a word of it, until Prince Daemon confirmed the tale was true. "Give the girl to me to wife," he purportedly told his brother. "Who else will take her now?" Instead, King Viserys sent him into exile, never to return to the Seven Kingdoms on pain of death. Lord Strong, the king's hand, argued that the prince should be put to death immediately, as a traitor, but Septon Eustace reminded his grace that no man is accursed as a kingslayer. Of the aftermath, these things are certain. Daemon Targaryen returned to the Stepstones and resumed his struggle for those barren, storm-swept rocks. Grand Maester Runster and Sir Harold Westerling both died in 112 AC. Sir Criston Cole was named Lord Commander of the Kingsguard in Sir Harold's place, and the Archmaesters of the Citadel sent Maester Melos to Rhaenyra take up the Grand Maester's chain and duties. Elsewise, King's Landing returned to customary tranquility for the best part of 2 years, until 113 AC, when Princess Rhaenyra turned 16.
Took possession of Dragonstone as our own seat and married, long before any man had reason to doubt Princess Rhaenyra's innocence.
The question of selecting a suitable consort for Rhaenyra had been of great concern to King Viserys and his small council. Great lords and dashing knights fluttered around her, vying for her favour. When Rhaenyra visited the Trident in 112 AC, the sons of Lord Bracken and Lord Blackwood fought a duel over her, and a younger son of House Frey was so bold as to openly ask for her hand. In the Westlands, Sir Jason Lannister and his twin, Sir Tyland, vied with her during a feast at Casterly Rock. The sons of Lord Tully of Riverrun, Lord Tyrell of Highgarden, Lord Oakhart of Old Oak, and Lord Tarley of Hornhill paid court to the princess, as did the Hand's eldest son, Sir Harwin Strong. Breakbones, as he was called, was heir to Harrenhal, and was said to be the strongest man in the Seven Kingdoms. Viserys even talked of wedding Rhaenyra to the Prince of Dorne, as a way of bringing the Dornish into the Seven Kingdoms. Queen Alicent had her own candidate, and seemingly a sensible suggestion given the issue of succession, her eldest son, Prince Aegon, Rhaenyra's half-brother. But Aegon was a boy, the princess 10 years his elder. Moreover, the two half-siblings had never gotten on well, all the more reason to bind them together in marriage, the Queen argued. But Viserys did not agree. The boy is Alicent's own blood, he told Lord Strong. She wants him on the throne, over my daughter. The best choice, the king and his small council finally agreed, would be Rhaenyra's cousin, Laenor Velaryon. Though the Great Council of 101 AC had ruled against his claim, the Velaryon boy remained a grandson of Prince Aemond Targaryen and great-grandson of the old king himself. Such a match would unite and strengthen the royal bloodline and regain the Iron Throne the friendship of the Sea Snake with his powerful fleet. One objection was raised. Lord Velaryon was now 19 years of age, yet had shown no interest in any woman. Instead, he surrounded himself with handsome squires of his own age, and was said to prefer their company. But Grand Maester Melos dismissed dismissed the concerns out of hand. "What of it?" he said. "I do not like the taste of fish, but when fish is served, I eat it." Thus, the match was decided. King and council had neglected to consult Princess Rhaenyra, however, and Rhaenyra had proven to be very much her father's daughter, with her own notions about whom she wished to wed. The princess knew all about Laenor Velaryon's reputation, and had no wish to be his bride. "My half-brother would be more to his tastes," she told the king. The princess always took care to refer to Queen Alicent's sons as her half-brothers, never as full brothers. Although Viserys reasoned with her, pleaded with her, shouted at her, and called her an ungrateful daughter, no words of his could budge her, until the king brought out the question of succession. What a king had done, a king could easily undo, Viserys pointed out to Rhaenyra. She would wed as he commanded, or would make her half-brother, Aegon, his heir in place of her. At this, the princess's will gave way. Certain Eustace says she fell to her father's knees and begged for his forgiveness. Mushroom, on the other hand, that she spat in her father's face. But both agreed that in the end she consented to the match. That night, Certain Eustace reports that Sir Criston Cole slipped into the princess's bedchambers to confess his love for her. He told Rhaenyra that he had a ship waiting for them in the bay, and begged her to flee with him across the narrow sea. They would be wed in Tyrosh or Old Volantis, where her father's writ did not run, and no one would care that Sir Criston had betrayed his vows as a member of the Kingsguard. His prowess with a sword and a morning star was such that he had no doubt he could find some merchant prince to take him into his service. But Rhaenyra refused him. She was the blood of the dragon, she reminded him, and that meant more than to live out her life as the wife of a common sellsword. And if Sir Criston could set aside his Kingsguard vows, why would marriage vows mean any more to him? Mushroom tells a very different tale. In his version, it was Princess Rhaenyra who went to Sir Criston, not him to her. She found him alone in the White Sword Tower, barred the door and slipped off her cloak to reveal herself naked underneath. "I saved my maidenhead for you," she told him. "Take it now as proof of my love. It will mean little unless to my betrothed, and perhaps when he learns that I am not chaste, he will refuse me." But Sir Criston was a man of honour, and true to his vows. Even when Rhaenyra used the art she had learnt from her uncle Daemon, Cole was not to be swayed. Scorned and furious, the princess donned her cloak again and swept out into the night, where she chanced to encounter Sir Harwin Strong, returning from a night of revelry in the stews of the city. Breakbones had long desired the princess and lacked Sir Criston's scruples. It was he who took Rhaenyra's innocence, according to Mushroom, who claimed to have found them in bed at the break of day. However it happened, whether the princess scorned the night or he her, from that day forward the love that Sir Criston Cole had formerly borne Rhaenyra Targaryen turned into loathing and disdain. The man who had been the princess's constant companion and champion became the most bitter of her foes. Not long thereafter, Rhaenyra set sail for Driftmark on the Sea Snake, accompanied by her handmaidens, two of them daughters of the Hand and sisters to Sir Harwin. The full Mushroom and her new champion, none other than Breakbones himself. In 114 AC, Rhaenyra Targaryen, Princess of Dragonstone, took to husband Sir Laenor Velaryon. Knighted a fortnight before the wedding, since it was deemed necessary for the prince consort to be a knight. The bride was 17 years old, the groom 20, and all alleged that they made a handsome couple. The wedding was celebrated with 7 days of feasts and jousting, the greatest tourney for many years. Amongst the competitors were Queen Alicent's siblings, 5 brothers of the Kingsguard, Sir Harwin Strong, and the groom's favourite, Sir Joffrey Lonmouth, known as the Knight of Kisses. When Rhaenyra bestowed her garter on Sir Harwin, her new husband laughed and gave one of his own to Sir Joffrey. Denied Rhaenyra's favour, Criston Cole turned to Queen Alicent instead. Wearing her token, the young Lord Commander of the Kingsguard defeated all challengers, fighting in a black fury. He left Breakbones with a broken collarbone and a shattered elbow, but it was the Knight of Kisses who felt the fullest measure of his wrath. Cole's favourite weapon was the Morning Star, and the blows he rained down on Sir Laenor's champion cracked his helm, left him senseless in the mud. Taken bloody from the battlefield, Sir Joffrey died without recovering consciousness 6 days later. Mushroom tells us that Laenor spent every hour of those days at his bedside, and wept bitterly when the stranger called him. Sir Laenor returned to Driftmark thereafter, leaving many to wonder if the marriage had even been consummated. The princess remained at court, surrounded by her friends and admirers. Sir Criston Cole was not amongst them, having gone over entirely to the Queen's party, the Greens, but the massive and redoubtable Breakbones filled his place, becoming the foremost of the Blacks. At Rhaenyra's side at feasts and balls and hunts. Her husband raised no objections. Laenor Velaryon preferred the comforts of high tide on Driftmark, where he soon found a new favourite in a household knight named Sir Carl Corey. Thereafter, though he joined his wife for important court events, where his presence was expected, Sir Laenor spent most of his days apart from the princess. Certain Eustace estimates they shared a bed no more than a dozen times. Mushroom concurs, but adds that Carl Corey often shared that bed as well. It aroused the princess to watch the men disporting with each other, and from time to time the two would include her in their pleasures. As often is the case with Mushroom's testimony, he contradicts himself, as elsewhere he claims that the princess would leave her husband with his lover on such nights, seeking her own solace in the arms of Sir Harwin Strong. Whatever the truth of these tales is, it was soon announced that the princess was with child. Born in the waning days of 114 AC, the boy was a large, strapping baby with brown hair, brown eyes, and a pug-like nose. For clarity, it should be pointed out that Sir Laenor Velaryon had an aquiline nose, silver-white hair, and purple eyes that spoke of his Valyrian heritage. Laenor's wish to name the child Joffrey was overruled by his father, Lord Corlys. Instead, the child was given an additional Velaryon name, Jacaerys.
To friends and to brothers, he would be called Jace. The court was still celebrating the birth of Princess Rhaenyra's child
when her stepmother, Queen Alicent, also went into labour, delivering Viserys his third son, Daemon, who, unlike that of Jacaerys, testified to his Targaryen blood. By royal command, the infant Jacaerys Velaryon and Daemon Targaryen shared a wet nurse until weaned. It was said that the king hoped to prevent the enmity between the two boys by raising them as milk brothers. If this was Viserys' intent, it is very clear his plan did not work. A year later, in 115 AC, there came a tragic mishap of the sort that shapes the destiny of kingdoms. The Lady of Runestone, Rhae Royce, fell from her horse while hawking and cracked her skull upon a stone. She lingered for 9 days before finally feeling well enough to leave her bed, only to collapse and die within an hour of rising. A raven was duly sent to Storm's End, and Lord Baratheon dispatched a messenger by ship to Bloodstone on the Stepstones, where Prince Daemon was still struggling to defend his meagre kingdom against the men of the Hierarchy and their Dornish allies. Daemon flew at once to the Vale, he said, though more likely it was in the hopes of laying claim to her lands, castles and incomes. In that, Daemon failed. Runestone instead passed to Lady Rhae's nephew, and when Daemon made appeal to the Eyrie, not only was his claim dismissed, but Lady Jane Arryn warned him that his presence in the Vale was unwelcome. Flying back to the Stepstones afterwards, Prince Daemon landed at Driftmark to make a courtesy call upon his partner in conquest, the sea snake, Corlys Velaryon. High Tide was one of the very few places in the Seven Kingdoms where the king's brother could be confident he would not be turned away. There, his eyes fell upon Lord Corlys' daughter, Laena, a maid of 22, tall, slender, and surprisingly lovely, with a great mane of silver gold hair, ringlets that fell down past her waist. Laena Velaryon had been betrothed from the age of 12 to the son of the Sea Lord of Braavos, but the father had died before they could wed, and the son soon proved to be a wasteful fool, squandering his family's wealth and power before turning up on Driftmark. Lacking a graceful means to rid himself of the embarrassment, but unwilling to proceed with the marriage, Lord Corlys had repeatedly postponed the wedding. Prince Daemon fell in love with Laena. Men of a more cynical bent believed the prince saw her as a way to check his own descent. Once seen as his brother's heir, he had fallen down the line of succession, and neither the Greens nor the Blacks had place for him. But House Velaryon was powerful enough to defy both parties with impunity. Weary of the Stepstones, free at last of his wife, Daemon Targaryen asked Lord Corlys for his daughter's hand in marriage. The exiled Braavosi betrothed remained an impediment, but not for long. Daemon mocked him to his face so savagely, the boy had no chance but to call him to defend his words with steel. Armed with Dark Sister, the prince made short work of his rival, and wed Lady Laena Velaryon a fortnight later, abandoning his kingdom on the Stepstones. Prince Daemon knew that his brother would not be pleased when he heard of his marriage. Prudently, the prince and his new bride took themselves far from Westeros soon after the wedding. Crossing the narrow sea on their dragons, some say they flew to Valyria, in defiance of the curse that hung over the smoking wasteland, to search out the secrets of the dragon lords of old. Mushroom reports this as fact in his testimony, but there is abundant evidence that the truth was far less romantic. Prince Daemon and Lady Laena flew first to Pentos, where they were feasted by the city's prince. The Pentoshi feared the growing power of the Triarchy to the south, and saw Daemon as a very valuable ally against the three daughters. From there they crossed the disputed lands to Old Volantis, where they enjoyed a similar warm welcome. Then they flew up the Rhoyne to visit Qohor and Norvos. In those cities, far removed from the woes of Westeros and the powers of the Triarchy, their welcome was far less rapturous. Everywhere they went, huge crowds turned out for a glimpse of Vhagar and Caraxes. The Dragon Riders were once again in Pentos when Lady Laena learned she was with child. Ruling against further flight, Prince Daemon and his wife settled in the manse outside the city walls as a guest of the Pentoshi Magister until such time as the baby was born. Meanwhile, back in Westeros, Princess Rhaenyra gave birth to a second son late in the year 115 AC. The child was named Lucerys, Luke for short. Septon Eustace tells us that both Sir Laenor Velaryon and Sir Harwin Strong were at Rhaenyra's bedside for his birth. Like his brother Jace, Luke had brown eyes and a healthy head of brown hair, rather than the silver hair of a Targaryen. But he was a large and lusty baby, and King Viserys was delighted with him when the child was presented at court. However, these feelings were not shared by his queen. "Do keep trying," Queen Alicent told Sir Laenor. "Sooner or later, you may get one that looks like you." And the rivalry between the Greens and the Blacks grew deeper, finally reaching the point where the Queen and the Princess could scarce suffer each other's presence. Thereafter, Queen Alicent kept to the Red Keep, whilst the Princess spent her days on Dragonstone, attended by her ladies, Mushroom, and her champion Sir Harwin Strong. Her husband, Sir Laenor, was said to visit frequently. In 116 AC, in the free city of Pentosh, Lady Laena gave birth to twin daughters, Prince Daemon's first true-born children. Prince Daemon named these girls Baela, after his father Balon, and Rhaenyra, after her mother. The babies were small and sickly, but both had fine features, silver white hair and purple eyes. When they were half a year old and stronger, the girls and their mother sailed to Driftmark, whilst Daemon flew ahead with both dragons. From High Tide, he sent a raven to his brother in King's Landing, informing the king of the birth of his nieces, and begging leave to present the girls at court to receive his royal blessing. Though his hand and small council argued heatedly against it, Viserys consented, for the king still loved the brother who had been the companion of his youth. "Daemon is a father now," he told Grand Maester Mellos. "He will have changed." Thus were the sons of Balon Targaryen reconciled for the second time. In 117 AC on Dragonstone, Princess Rhaenyra bore yet another son. Sir Laenor was at last permitted to name the child after his fallen friend, Sir Joffrey Lonmouth. Joffrey Velaryon was as big and red-faced and healthy as his brothers, but also like them, had brown eyes, brown hair, and features that some at court called common. The whisperings and rumours began once again. Amongst the Greens, it was an article of faith, seen as a fact, that the father of Rhaenyra's sons was not her husband Sir Laenor, but her champion Harwin Strong. Mushroom says as much in his testimony, and Grand Maester Mellos hints at this, while Septon Eustace raises the rumour only to dismiss them. But for many, the evidence spoke volumes, that Rhaenyra Targaryen's children were in fact fathered by Harwin Strong. Whatever the truth of these allegations is, there was never any doubt that King Viserys still meant for his daughter to follow him upon the Iron Throne, and her sons to follow her in turn. By a royal decree, each of the Velaryon boys were presented with a dragon's egg in the cradle. Those who doubted the paternity of Rhaenyra's sons whispered the eggs would never hatch, but the birth in turn of 3 young dragons gave lie to their words. Something that should be remembered is that whether the boy's father was Harwin Strong or Laenor Velaryon, their mother was still a Targaryen, and they still possessed the blood of old Valyria. The hatchlings were named Vermax, Arax, and Tyrax, and Septon Eustace tells us that Viserys sat Jace upon his knee atop the Iron Throne and was heard to say, "One day this will be your seat, lad." Childbirth exacted a toll on the princess. The weight that Rhaenyra gained during her pregnancies never wholly left her, and by the time her youngest son was born, she had grown stout and thick of waist, the beauty of her girlhood a fading memory, though she was but 20 years of age. According to Mushroom,
this only served to deepen her resentment of her stepmother, Queen Alicent, who remained slender and graceful. The sins of the father are often passed down to their son.
And so it is the case with the sins of mothers as well. The enmity between Queen Alicent and Princess Rhaenyra was passed on to their sons, and the Queen's 3 boys, Prince Aegon, Aemond, and Daemon, grew to be bitter rivals of their Velaryon nephews, resentful for them for having stolen for what they regarded as their birthright. Though all 6 boys attended the same feasts, and sometimes trained together in the yard under the same master-at-arms, and studied under the same maesters, this enforced closeness only served to feed their mutual dislike for each other, rather than binding them together as brothers. Whilst Princess Rhaenyra misliked her stepmother, Queen Alicent, she became fond and more than fond of her sister-in-law, Lady Laena. With Driftmark and Dragonstone so close, Daemon and Laena often visited with the princess, and her with them. Many a time they flew together on their dragons. In 118 AC, with the blessing of King Viserys, Rhaenyra announced the betrothal of her 2 eldest sons to the daughters of Prince Daemon and Lady Laena. Jacaerys, 4, and Lucerys, 3, the twin girls, 2. And in 119 AC, when Laena found out she was with child again, Rhaenyra flew to Driftmark to attend her during the birth, and so it was that the princess was at her side on the third day of that cursed year 120 AC, the year of the Red Spring. A day and a night of labour left Laena Velaryon pale and weak. Finally, she gave birth to the son Prince Daemon had so longed for, but the baby was twisted and malformed, dying within an hour. Nor did his mother long survive him. Her grueling labour had drained Lady Laena's strength, and grief weakened her further still, making her helpless before the onset of childbed fever. As her condition steadily worsened, despite the best efforts of Driftmark's young maester, Prince Daemon flew to Dragonstone and brought back Princess Rhaenyra's own maester, an older and more experienced man, renowned for his skills as a healer. Sadly, Maester Geraldus came too late. After 3 days of delirium, Lady Laena passed from the mortal coil. She was 27 years old. During her final hour, it is said that Lady Laena rose from her bed, pushed away the sceptres praying over her, and made her way from her room, intent on reaching Vhagar, that she might fly one last time. Her strength failed her on the tower steps though, and it was there she collapsed and died. Her husband, Prince Daemon, carried her back to her bed. Afterward, Mushroom tells us that Princess Rhaenyra sat vigil with Daemon over Laena's corpse, and comforted him in his grief. Lady Laena's death was the first tragedy of 120 AC, but it would not be the last, for this was to be the year when many of the long-simmering tensions and jealousies that plagued the Seven Kingdoms finally came to a boil. A year when many and more would have reason to wail and grieve, though none more so than the sea snake, Lord Corlys Velaryon, and his noble wife, Princess Rhaenys, the woman who could have been a queen. The Lord of the Tides and his lady were still in mourning for their beloved daughter when the stranger came once again to carry off their son. Sir Laenor Velaryon, husband to Princess Rhaenyra and the apparent father of her children, was slain whilst attending a fair in Spicetown, stabbed to death by his friend and companion, Sir Carl Corey. The two men had been quarrelling loudly before blades were drawn. Merchants at the fair told Lord Velaryon when he came to collect his son's body. Corey had fled by them, wounding several men who tried to hinder him. Some claimed a ship had been waiting offshore, but he was never seen again. The circumstances of the murder remain a mystery to this day. Grand Maester Melos writes only that Sir Laenor was killed by one of his own household knights after a quarrel. Septon Eustace provides us with the killer's name and declares jealousy the motive for the slaying. Laenor Velaryon had grown weary of Sir Carl's company and had grown enamoured with a new favourite, a handsome young squire of 16. Mushroom, as always, favours the most sinister theory, suggesting that Prince Daemon paid Carl Quarry to dispose of Princess Rhaenyra's husband, arranged a ship to carry him away, then cut his throat and fed him to the sea. A household knight of relatively low birth, Quarry was known to have a lord's taste and a peasant's purse, and was given to extravagant wagering, which leads a certain credence to this version of events. Yet there was no shred of proof, then or now, that the sea snake offered a reward of 10,000 golden dragons for any man who could lead him to Sir Carl Quarry or deliver the killer. Even this was not the end of the tragedies that would mark that dreadful year. The next occurred at high tide after Sir Laenor's funeral, when the king and court made their journey to Driftmark to bear witness at his pyre, many on the backs of their dragons. So many dragons were present that Septon Eustace wrote that Driftmark had become the new Valyria. The cruelty of children is known to all. Prince Aegon Targaryen was 13, Princess Helena 11, Prince Aemond 10, and Prince Daemon 6. Both Aegon and Helena were dragon riders. Helena now flew Dreamfire, whilst her brother Aegon, the young Sunfire, who is said to be the most beautiful dragon seen upon the earth. Even the young Prince Daemon had a dragon, a young blue dragon named Tessarion, though he had yet to ride it. Only the middle son, Prince Aemond, remained dragonless, but Aemond had hopes of rectifying that, and had put forward the notion that perhaps might stop by a dragonstone after the funeral. A wealth of dragon eggs could be found beneath the dragon mount, and several young hatchings as well. The prince could have his choice of dragon, but even at 10, Aemond Targaryen did not lack for boldness. He resolved not to wait for dragonstone. What did he want with some puny hatchling or some stupid egg? Right there at high tide was a dragon worthy of him, Vhagar, the oldest, largest, most terrible dragon in the world after the death of the Black Dread. Even for a son of House Targaryen, there are always dangers in approaching a dragon, particularly an old, bad-tempered dragon who had recently lost her rider. His father and mother would never allow him to go near Vhagar. Aemond knew, much and less try and ride her, so he made certain they did not know, sliding from his bed at dawn whilst they still slept, and stealing down to the outer yard where Vhagar and the other dragons were fed and stabled. The prince had hoped to mount Vhagar in secrecy, but as he crept up to the dragon, a boy's voice rang out. "You stay away from her." The voice belonged to the youngest youngest of his half-nephews, Joffrey Velaryon, a boy of 3, and an early riser. Joffrey had sneaked down from his bed to see his own dragon, Tyrax. Afraid that the boy would raise the alarm, Prince Aemond shouted at him to be quiet, then shoved him backwards into a pile of dragon droppings. As Joffrey began to bawl, Aemond raced back to Vhagar and clambered up upon her back. Later he would say that he was so afraid of being caught that he forgot to be frightened. Call it boldness, call it madness, call it fortune, or the will of the gods. Who can know the mind of a dragon? But we do know this. Vhagar roared, lurched to her feet, shook violently, then snapped her chains and flew, and the boy Prince Aemond Targaryen became a dragon rider, circling twice around the towers of Hightide before coming down again. But when he landed, Rhaenyra's sons were waiting for him. Joffrey had run to get his brothers when Aemond took to the sky, and both Jace and Luke had come. The Velaryon princelings were younger than Aemond. Jace was 6, Luke 5, and Joffrey only 3, but there was still 3 of them, and they'd armed themselves with wooden swords from the training yard. They fell on Aemond with a fury. The prince fought back, breaking Luke's nose with a punch, then wrenching a sword from Joffrey's hand and cracking it across the back of Jace's head, driving him to his knees. As the younger boy scrambled back away from him, bloody and bruised, the prince began to mock them, laughing and calling them the Strongs. Jace, at least, was old enough to grasp the insult. He flew at Aemond once again, but the older boy began pummeling him savagely, until Luke, coming to the rescue of his brother, drew his dagger and slashed Aemond across the face, taking out his right eye. By the time the stable boys finally arrived to pull apart the combatants, the prince was withering on the ground,
howling in pain, and Vhagar was roaring as well.
After Prince Aemond had claimed Vhagar and the fight with the Velaryon boys that cost him his eye, King Viserys tried to make a peace, requiring each of the boys to apologize to the other, but these courtesies did not appease their vengeful mothers. Queen Alicent demanded that one of Lucerys Velaryon's eyes should be put out, for the eye he had cost Aemond. Princess Rhaenyra would have none of that, but insisted that Prince Aemond should be questioned sharply until he revealed where he heard sons called the Strongs. To name them that was tantamount to saying they were bastards, with no rights of succession, and that she herself was guilty of high treason. When pressed by the king, Prince Aemond said it was his brother, Aegon, who had told him they were Strongs, and Prince Aegon only said, "Everyone knows, just look at them." King Viserys finally put an end to the questioning, declaring he would hear no more. No eyes would be put out, he decreed, but should any man or woman or child, noble or common, mock his grandsons as Strongs again, their tongues would be pulled out with hot pincers. He further commanded his wife and daughter to kiss and exchange vows of love and affection, but their false smiles and empty words deceived no one but the king. As for the boys, Prince Aemond said later that he had lost an eye but gained a dragon that day, and counted it a fair exchange. To prevent further conflict and to put an end to these vile rumours, King Viserys further decreed that Queen Alicent and her sons would return with him to court, while Princess Rhaenyra confined herself to Dragonstone with her sons. Henceforth, Sir Eric Cagill of the Kingsguard would serve as her sworn shield, while Breakbones, Sir Harwin Strong, returned to Harrenhal. These rulings pleased no one, but set him useless rights. According to Mushroom's testimony, one man at least was thrilled by the decree, for Dragonstone and Driftmark lay quite close to one another, and this proximity would allow Daemon Targaryen ample opportunity to comfort his niece, Princess Rhaenyra, unbeknownst to the king. Though Viserys would reign for 9 more years, the bloody seed of the Dance of the Dragons had already been planted, and 120 AC was the year when it began to sprout. The next to perish were the elder Strongs. Laenor Strong, Lord of Harrenhal and Hand of the King, accompanied his son and heir, Sir Harwin, on his return to the great half-ruined castle. Shortly after their arrival, a fire broke out in the tower where they were sleeping, and both father and son were killed, along with 3 of their retainers and a dozen servants. The cause of the fire was never determined. Some put it down to a simple mischance, whilst others muttered that Black Harren's seat was cursed and brought only doom to any man who held it. Many suspected the blaze was set intentionally. Mushroom suggests that the sea snake was behind it, as an act of vengeance against the man who had cuckolded his son. Certain Eustace, more plausibly, suspects Prince Daemon, removing a rival for Princess Rhaenyra's infections. Others have put forth the notion that Larys Clodfoot might have been responsible. With his father and elder brother dead, Larys had become Lord of Harrenhal. The most disturbing possibility was advanced by none other than Grand Maester Mellos, who muses that the king himself might have given the command. If Viserys had come to accept the rumour about the parentage of Rhaenyra's children, he might well have wished to remove the man who had dishonoured his daughter, lest he somehow reveal the bastardy of her sons. Were that so, Lionel Strong's death was an unfortunate accident, for his lordship's decision to see his son back to Harrenhal had been unforeseen. Lord Strong had been the king's hand, and Viserys had come to rely upon his strength and counsel. The king had reached the age of 43 and had grown quite stout. He no longer had the young man's vigour and was afflicted by gout, aching joints and back pain, and a tightness in his chest that came and went and often left him red-faced and short of breath. The governance of the realm was a daunting task. The king needed a strong and capable hand to shoulder some of his burdens. Briefly, he considered sending for Princess Rhaenyra, who better to rule with him than the daughter he meant to succeed him on the Iron Throne. But that would have meant bringing the princess and her sons back to King's Landing, where more conflict with the queen and her own brood would have been inevitable. He considered his brother as well, until he recalled Prince Daemon's previous stint on the Small Council. Grand Maester Mellos suggested bringing in some younger man, and put forward several names, but his grace chose familiarity, and recalled to court Sir Otto Hightower, the Queen's father, who had filled the office before, for both Viserys and the old King Jaehaerys. Yet hardly had Sir Otto arrived at the Red Keep to take up the handship, than word reached court that Princess Rhaenyra had remarried, taking to husband her uncle, Daemon Targaryen. The princess was 23, Prince Daemon 39. King, court, and commons were all outraged by the news. Neither Daemon's wife nor Rhaenyra's husband had been dead even half a year. To wed again so soon was an insult to their memories. The marriage had been performed on Dragonstone, suddenly and secretly. Certain users claims that Rhaenyra knew that her father would never approve of the match, so she wed in haste to make certain he could not prevent the marriage. Mushroom puts forward a different reason. The princess was once again with child and did not wish to birth a bastard, and thus that dreadful year 120 AC ended as it begun, with a woman labouring in childbirth. Princess Rhaenyra's pregnancy had a happier outcome than Lady Laena's had. As the year waned, she brought forth a small but robust son, a pale princeling with dark purple eyes and pale silvery hair. She named him Aegon. Prince Daemon had at last a living son of his own blood, and this new prince, unlike his three half-brothers, was plainly a Targaryen. In King's Landing, however, Queen Alicent grew most wroth when she learnt that the babe had been named Aegon, taking it for a slight against their own son, which according to the testimonies of Mushroom, it most certainly was. By all rights, the year 122 should have been a joyous one for House Targaryen. Princess Rhaenyra took to the birthing bed once more and gave her uncle Daemon a second son, named Viserys after his grandsire. The child was smaller and less robust than his brother, but proved to be a most precocious child. Somewhat ominously, the dragon's egg placed in his cradle never hatched. The Greens took that as an ill omen and were not shy about saying as much. Later the same year, King's Landing celebrated a wedding as well. Following the ancient tradition of House Targaryen, King Viserys wed his son, Aegon the Elder, to his daughter, Laena. The groom was 15 years of age, and lazy, and somewhat sulky boy, certain Eustace tells us, but possessed more than a healthy appetite. A glutton at the table, and pinching and fondling any serving girl who strayed within his reach. The bride, his sister, was but 13. Though plumper and less striking than most Targaryens, Laena was a pleasant, happy girl, and all agreed she would make a fine mother. And so she did. And quickly, barely a year later in 123 AC, the 14-year-old princess gave birth to twins, a boy she named Jaehaerys, and a girl she named Rhaenyra. Prince Aegon had heirs of his own now, the Greens at court proclaimed. A dragon's egg was placed in the cradle of each child, and 2 hatchlings soon came forth. Yet, all was not so well with these new twins. Rhaenyra was tiny, and slow to grow. She did not cry, she did not smile, she did none of the things a babe was meant to do. Her brother, whilst larger and more robust, was also less perfect than expected of a Targaryen princeling, boasting 6 fingers on his left hand and 6 toes upon each foot. Children did little to curb the carnal appetites of Prince Aegon the Elder. If Mushroom is to be believed, he fathered 2 bastard children the same year as his twins, a boy on a girl whose maidenhood he'd won at an auction on the Street of Silk, and a girl by one of his mother's handmaidens. Later, in 127 AC, Princess Laena gave Aegon his second son, who was given a dragon's egg and named Maelor. Queen Alicent's other sons had been growing older as well. Prince Aemond, despite the loss of his eye, had become a proficient and dangerous swordsman under the tutelage of Sir Criston Cole, but remained a wild and willful child, hot-tempered and unforgiving. His little brother, Prince Daemon, was the most popular of the Queen's sons, as clever as he was courteous, and most comely as well. When he turned 12 in 126 AC, Daemon was sent to Oldtown to serve as a cupbearer and squire to Lord Hightower. That same year, across Blackwater Bay, the sea snake, Corlys Velaryon, was stricken by sudden fever. As he took to his bed, surrounded by maesters, the issue arose as to who should succeed him as the Lord of the Tides, a master of Driftmark, should the sickness claim him. With both his true-born children dead, by law his lands and titles should pass to his eldest grandson, Jacaerys. But since Jace would presumably ascend the Iron Throne after his mother, Princess Rhaenyra urged her father-in-law to name instead her second son, Lucerys. Lord Corlys also had a half-dozen nephews, however, and the eldest of them, Sir Aemond Velaryon, protested that the inheritance by right should pass to him, on the grounds that Rhaenyra's sons were bastards sired by Harwin Strong. The princess was not slow to answer this charge. She dispatched Prince Daemon to seize Sir Aemond, had his head removed and fed his remains to her dragon, Syrax. Even this did not end the matter. Sir Aemond's younger cousin fled to King's Landing with his wife and sons, there to cry for justice and place their claims before the king and queen. King Viserys had grown extremely fat and red-faced, and scarcely had the strength to mount the steps to the Iron Throne. The king heard them out in a stony silence, then ordered their tongues removed. "You were warned," he declared, as they were being dragged away. "I will hear no more of these lies." As he was descending the Iron Throne, Viserys stumbled and reached out to right himself, and sliced his left hand open to the bone on the jagged blades protruding from the Iron Throne. Though Grand Maester Mellos washed the cut out with boiled wine, and bound up the hand with strips of linen soaked in healing ointments, a fever soon followed, and many feared the king might die. Only the arrival of Princess Rhaenyra from Dragonstone turned the tide, for with her came her own healer, Maester Geraldus, who acted swiftly to remove 2 fingers from the king's hand to save his life. Though much weakened by his ordeal, King Viserys soon resumed to rule. To celebrate his recovery, a feast was held on the first day of 127 AC. The princess and the queen were both commanded to attend, with all their children. In a show of enmity, each woman wore the other's colours, and many declarations of love were made, much to the king's great pleasure. Prince Daemon raised the cup to Sir Otto Hightower and thanked him for his service as hand. Sir Otto in turn spoke of the prince's courage, while Alicent's children and Rhaenyra's greeted one another with kisses and broke bread together at table. Or at least, that's what the court records show. Late in that evening, after King Viserys had departed the feast, as his grace still tired easily, Mushroom tells us that Aemond rose to toast his Velaryon nephews, speaking in mock admiration of their brown hair, brown eyes, and strength. "I have never known anyone so strong as my sweet nephews," he ended. "So let us drain our cups to these 3 strong boys." Still later, the full reports Aegon the Elder took offence when Jacaerys Velaryon asked his wife Laena for a dance. Angry words were exchanged, and the 2 princes might have come to blows if not for the intervention of the Kingsguard. Whether King Viserys was ever informed of these incidents, we do not know, but Princess Rhaenyra and her sons returned to their own seat on Dragonstone the next morning. After the loss of his fingers, Viserys Targaryen never sat upon the Iron Throne again. Thereafter, he shunned the throne room altogether, preferring to hold court in his solar, and later in his bedchamber surrounded by maesters, septons, and his faithful fool Mushroom, the only man who could still make him laugh. Death visited the court again a short time later, when Grand Maester Mellos collapsed one night whilst he was climbing the Serpentine steps. His had always been a moderating voice in council, forever urging calm and compromise whenever issues rose between the Blacks and the Greens. To the king's distress, however, the passing of the man he called my trusted friend only served to provoke a fresh dispute between the factions. Princess Rhaenyra wanted Maester Geraldus, who long served her on Dragonstone, to replace Mellos. It was only his healing skills that had saved the king's life when Viserys cut his hand on the throne, she claimed. Queen Alicent, however, insisted that the princess and her maester had mutilated Viserys unnecessarily. Had they not meddled, she claimed Grand Maester Mellos would have surely essayed the king's fingers as well as his life. She urged the appointment of one Maester Alfador, presently in the service at the Hightower. Viserys, beset from both sides, chose neither, reminding both the princess and the queen that the choice was not his to make. The citadel of Oldtown chose the Grand Maester, not the crown. In due time, the conclave bestowed the chain of office upon Archmaester Orwyle, one of their own. King Viserys did seem to recover some of his old vigour once the new Grand Maester arrived at court. Septon Eustace tells us that this was the result of prayer, but most believe that Orwell's potions were more effectuous than the leechings Mellos had preferred. But such recoveries proved short-lived. Gout, chest pains, and shortness of breath continued to trouble the king. In the final years of his reign, as his health failed, Viserys left even more of the governance of the realm to his hand and the Small Council. At this point, we ought to look at the members of the Small Council on the eve of the great events of 129 AC, for they were to play a large role in all that follows. The King's hand remained Sir Otto Hightower, father of the Queen and uncle to the Lord of Old Town, Grand Maester Orwell, while the newest member of the council, and was thought to favour neither the Blacks nor the Greens. The commander of the King's Guard remained Sir Criston Cole, and in him Rhaenyra Targaryen had a bitter foe. The aged Lord Lyman Beesbury was Master of Coin, in which capacity he had served almost uninterrupted since the days of Jaehaerys. The youngest councillors were the Lord Admiral and Master of Ships, Sir Tywin Lannister, brother to the Lord of Casterly Rock, and the Lord Confessor and Master of Whisperers, Larys Strong, Lord of Harrenhal. Lord Jasper Wilde, Master of Law, known amongst the small folk as Ironrod, completed the council. As the Seven Kingdoms welcomed the 129th year after Aegon's conquest, with bonfires, feasts and tourneys, King Viserys Targaryen was growing ever weaker. His chest pains had grown so severe that he could no longer climb a flight of steps, and had to be carried about the Red Keep in a chair. By the second moon of the year, the king had lost all appetite, and was ruling the realm from his bed, that is, when he felt strong enough to rule at all. Most days he preferred to leave matters of state into the hand, Sir Otto Hightower. On Dragonstone, meanwhile, Princess Rhaenyra was once again great with child. She too took to her bed. On the third day of the third moon of 129 AC, Princess Helena brought her 3 children to visit with the king in his chambers. The twins, Jaehaerys and Jaehaera, were 6 years old, their brother Maelor only 2. The king gave the babe a pearl ring off his finger to play with, and told the twins the story of how their great-great-grandsire and namesake Jaehaerys had flown his dragon north to the wall to defeat a vast host of wildlings, giants and wargs. Though the children had heard the story a dozen times before, they listened attentively. Afterwards, the king sent them away, pleading weariness and the tightness in his chest. Then Viserys, of House Targaryen, the first of his name, King of the Andals, the Rhaenyra and the First Men, Lord of the Seven Kingdoms and Protector of the Realm, closed his eyes and went to sleep. He never woke. He was 52 years old and had reigned over most of Westeros for 26 years. That is when the storm broke and the dragons danced. There were 2 claimants to the Iron Throne upon the death of King Viserys Targaryen. His daughter, Rhaenyra, the only surviving child of his first marriage, and Aegon, his eldest son by his second wife. Amidst the chaos and carnage brought on by their rivalry, other would-be kings would soon make claims as well, for a fortnight or a moon's turn, only to fall as swiftly as they had arisen. The war was one between Rhaenyra and Aegon. The dance split the Seven Kingdoms in 2, as lords, knights, and small folk declared for one side or the other as they took up arms against one another. Even House Targaryen itself was divided, with the siblings and children of each of the claimants becoming embroiled in the fighting. Over the 2 years of the struggle, a terrible toll was taken on the great lords of Westeros, together with their bannermen, knights, and small folk. Whilst the dynasty survived, the end of the fighting saw Targaryen power much diminished, and the world's last dragons vastly reduced in number. In a way, Westeros and the crown would never recover from the dance. It was a war unlike any other fought in the long history of the Seven Kingdoms. Though armies did march and met in savage battles, much of the fighting took place on water, and of course in the air, as dragon fought dragon, with tooth, claw and flame. It was a war marked by stealth, murder and betrayal, as well as one fought in the shadows and stairwells, council chambers and castle yards, with knives and lies and poison. There was no glory to be won in this conflict. Long simmering, the conflict burst into the open of the third moon of 129 AC, when the ailing, bedridden King Viserys Targaryen closed his eyes for a nap in the Red Keep of King's Landing and died without waking. His body was discovered by a serving man at the hour of the bat. The servant ran to inform Queen Alicent, whose apartments are on the floor below. Septon Eustace, writing on these events some years later, pointed out that the servant delivered his dire news directly to the Queen, and her alone, without raising the general alarm. Eustace does not believe this was wholly fortuitous. The king's death had been anticipated for some time, and Queen Alicent and her party, the Greens, had taken care to instruct all of Viserys' guards and servants in what to do when that day came. Alicent wanted to make the first move and crown her son before Rhaenyra could crown herself. Some also suggest a scenario whereby Queen Alicent hurried King Viserys on his way with a pinch of poison in his Hippocrates. But these suggestions come from parties close to Rhaenyra's camp and were not at King's Landing at the time. Queen Alicent went at once to the king's bedchamber, accompanied by Sir Criston Cole, the Lord Commander of the King's Guard. Once they confirmed that Viserys was dead, Alicent ordered the room sealed and placed under guard. The serving man who found the king's body was taken into custody To make certain he did not spread the tale, Sir Criston returned to the White Sword Tower and sent the Brothers of the Kingsguard to summon the members of the small council. It was the hour of the owl. Something to point out at this point is that this series of events were well planned and did go against established custom at the death of a king. Then, as now, the sworn Brothers of the Kingsguard consisted of 7 knights, men of proven loyalty and undoubtable prowess, who had taken solemn oaths to devote their lives to defending the king's person and family. Only 5 of the White Cloaks were in King's Landing at the time of Viserys' death: Sir Criston himself, Sir Eric Cargill, Sir Rickard Thorne, Sir Stephen Darkland, and Sir Wills Fell. Sir Eric Cargill and Sir Laurent Marabard were with Princess Rhaenyra, Viserys' acknowledged heir on Dragonstone. They remained unaware and uninvolved as their brothers-in-arms went forth into the night to rouse the members of the small council from their beds. The council was convened in the Queen's apartments, within Maegor's holdfast. The most detailed and authoritative account comes from Grand Maester Munkin's The Dance of the Dragons, a true telling. Though Munkin's exhaustive history was not written until a generation later, and drew on many different sorts of material, including Maester's chronicles, memoirs, Stuart's records, and interviews with 147 surviving witnesses to the great events of the time. His account on the inner workings of the court rely upon the confessions of Grand Maester Orwell, as set down before his execution. Unlike Mushroom and Septon Eustace, whose versions derive from rumours, hearsay, and family legend, the Grand Maester was present at the meeting and took part in the council's deliberations and discussions, though it must be recognised that at this time was most anxious to show himself in any favourable light, as to absolve himself of any blame for what might follow. Munkin's true telling therefore paints his predecessor in a perhaps too favourable of a light. Grand Maester Orwell opened the meeting by reviewing the customary tasks and procedures required at the death of a king. He said, Septon Eustace should be summoned to perform the last rites and pray for the king's soul. Then, a raven must be sent to Dragonstone at once to inform Princess Rhaenyra of her father's passing. May perhaps Her Grace, the Queen, would care to write a message, so as to soften the sad tidings with words of comfort. The bells are always rung to announce the death of a king. Someone should see to that, and of course we must begin to make our preparation for Queen Rhaenyra's coronation. It was at this point that Sir Otto Hightower cut the maester off. All this must wait, he declared, until the question of succession is settled. As the king's hand, he was empowered to speak with the king's voice, even to sit the Iron Throne in the king's absence. Viserys had granted him this authority to rule over the 7 kingdoms, and until such time as our new king is crowned, that rule would continue. Until our new queen is crowned, someone said. In Grand Maester Munkin's account, the words are Orwell's, spoken softly, no more than a quibble, but Mushroom and Septon Eustace insist that it was the elderly Lord Beesbury who spoke up, and in a waspish tone. King, insisted Queen Alicent. The Iron Throne by rights must pass to His Grace's eldest true-born son, Aegon. The discussion that followed lasted till dawn, Grand Maester Munkin tells us. Mushroom and Septon Eustace concur. In their accounts, only Lord Beesbury spoke on behalf of Princess Rhaenyra, the ancient master of coin, who had served King Viserys for a majority of his reign, and his grandfather, Jaehaerys, the old king before him, reminded the council that Rhaenyra was older than her brother, and also had more Targaryen blood. But the late king had chosen her as his successor, and he had repeatedly refused to alter the succession, despite the pleadings of Queen Alicent and her Green Party. The hundreds of lords and landed knights had sworn their fealty to the princess in the 105 AC, and sworn solemn oaths to defend her rights. But these words fell on deaf ears. Sir Tywin Lannister pointed out that many of the lords who had sworn to defend the succession of Princess Rhaenyra were long dead. It has been 24 years, he said. I myself swore no such oath. I was a child at the time. Lord Ironrod, the Master of Law, cited the Great Council of 101 and the old king's choice of Balon rather than Rhaenys in 92. Then discoursed at length about Aegon the Conqueror and his sisters, and how the hallowed Andal tradition, wherein the right of a true-born son always came before the rights of a daughter. Sir Otto reminded them that Rhaenyra's husband was none other than Prince Daemon, and we all know that one's nature. Make no mistake, should Rhaenyra ever sit the Iron Throne, it would be Lord Fleabottom who rules us. A king consort as cruel and unforgiving as Maegor ever was. My own head would be the first cut off, I do not doubt, but your queen, my daughter, will soon follow. Queen Alicent echoed him. Nor will they spare my children, she declared. Aegon and his brothers are the king's true-born sons, and with a better claim to the throne than her brood of bastards. Daemon will find some pretext to put them all to death, even Helena and her little ones. One of her bastards put out Aemond's eye. Never forget that. He was a boy, yes, but the boy is the father to a man, and bastards are monstrous by nature. It was then Sir Criston Cole spoke up. Should the princess reign, he reminded them, Jaehaerys Velaryon would rule after her. 7 saved the realm. if we seat a bastard on the Iron Throne. He spoke of Rhaenyra's wanton ways and the infamy of her husband. They will turn the Red Keep into a brothel. No man's daughter will be safe, nor any man's wife, even the boys. We all know what Laenor Velaryon was. It was not recorded what Larys Strong, the Master of Whispers, said during this debate, but this was not unnatural. Though he could use his tongue well, when need be, the Master of Whispers hoarded his words like a minster hoarding coins, preferring to listen rather than to talk. If we do this, Grand Maester Orwell cautioned the council, according to the true telling, it must surely lead to war. The princess will not meekly stand aside, and she has dragons and friends, Lord Beesbury declared. Men of honour who will not forget the vows they swore to her and her father. I am an old man, but not so old that I will sit here meekly, whilst the likes of you plot to steal her crown. And so saying, he rose to go. Grand Maester Orwell tells us that Lord Beesbury was seized at the door by the command of Sir Otto Hightower and escorted to the dungeons. Confined to a black cell, he would in time perish of a chill whilst awaiting trial. But Septon Eustace tells elsewise. In his accounts, a Christian Cole forced Lord Beesbury back to his seat and opened his throat with a dagger. Mushroom charges Sir Christian with his lordship's death as well. But in his version, Cole grasped the old man by the back of his collar, flung him out of a window, to die impaled upon the iron spikes in the dry moat below. But all the chronicles do agree on one particular. The first blood shed in the Dance of the Dragons belonged to Lord Lyman Beesbury, the Master of Coin and Lord Treasurer of the Seven Kingdoms. After the death of Lord Beesbury, there was no more dissent among the small council. The rest of the night was spent making plans for Aegon's coronation. It must be done quickly. All agreed, and the drawing up of lists of possible allies and potential enemies followed, should Princess Rhaenyra refuse Aegon's succession to the throne. With the princess in confinement on Dragonstone, about to give birth, Queen Alicent and her Greens enjoyed an advantage. The longer Rhaenyra remained ignorant of her father's death, the slower she would be to move. Maybe perhaps she would die in childbirth. Queen Alicent is reported to have said, "No ravens flew that night. No bells rang." The servants, who knew of the king's passing, were sent to the dungeons. Sir Criston Cole, Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, was given the task of taking into custody such blacks that remained at court. The lords and knights who might be inclined to favour Princess Rhaenyra and her claim to the throne. Do them no violence, unless they resist the hand of the king, Sir Otto Hightower told the Lord Commander. Such men as bend the knee and swear fealty to King Aegon shall suffer no harm at our hand. We have to rule the realm after we have won it. And those who will not bend the knee, asked Grand Maester Orwell, are traitors, said Ironrod, and must die a traitor's death. Lord Larys Strong, the Master of Whispers, then spoke for the first and only time that night. Let us be the first to swear, he said, lest there be traitors still here among us. Drawing a dagger, the clubfoot drew it across his palm. A blood oath, he urged, to bind all of us together, brothers unto death. And so each of the conspirators slashed their palms and clasped their hands with one another, swearing brotherhood. Queen Alicent alone amongst them was excluded from the oath, on account of her womanhood and being the queen. Dawn was breaking over the city before Queen Alicent dispatched the Kingsguard to bring her sons, Aegon and Aemond, to the council. Prince Daemon, the youngest and gentlest of her children, was in Old Town, serving as Lord Hightower's squire. One-eyed Prince Aemond, 19, was found in the armoury donning plate and mail for his morning practice in the castle yard. Is Aegon king? He asked Sir Willisfell, or must we kneel and kiss the old whore? Princess Helena was feeding her children when the Kingsguard came to her. When asked about the whereabouts of Prince Aegon, her brother and husband, she only said, "He's not in my bed, you may be sure. Feel free to search beneath the blankets." There are those that claim that Sir Criston found the young king to be drunk and naked in a flea-bottom rat pit, where two gutter snipes with filed teeth were biting and tearing at each other for his amusement, whilst the girl, who could be no more than 12, was in his bed. How much truth to these claims is unknown. The more likely scenario is Aegon was with a paramour when he was found. The girl was a daughter of a wealthy trader and well cared for. The prince at first refused to be part of his mother's plans. "My sister is the heir, not me. What sort of brother steals his sister's birthright?" It was only when Sir Criston Cole convinced him that the princess must surely execute him and his brothers should she don the crown did Aegon waver. Was any true-born Targaryen yet lives, no strong can ever hope to sit the Iron Throne, Cole said. Rhaenyra had no choice but to take your heads if she wishes her bastards to rule after her. It was this, and only this, that persuaded Aegon to accept the crown that the small council was offering him. Whilst the knights of the Kingsguard were seeking after Queen Alicent's sons, other messengers summoned the commander of the city watch and his captains. There were 7, each commanding one of the city gates. 5 were judged to be sympathetic to Prince Aegon's cause when questioned. The other 2, along with their commander, were deemed untrustworthy and found themselves in chains. Sir Luther Largent, The most fearsome of the Leal Five was made the new commander of the Goldcloaks. A bull of a man, nigh on 7 feet tall, Largent was rumoured to have once killed a warhorse with a single punch. Sir Otto Hightower, being a prudent man, he took care to name his own son Sir Gawain Hightower, the Queen's brother, as Largent's second, instructing him to keep a wary eye on Sir Luther for any sign of disloyalty. Sir Tywin Lannister was named Master of Coin in place of the late Lord Beesbury, and acted at once to seize the royal treasury. The crown's gold was divided into 4 parts. One part was entrusted to the care of the Iron Bank of Bravos for safekeeping, another sent under strong guard to Casterly Rock, a third to Old Town. The remaining wealth was to be used for bribes and gifts, and to hire sellswords if needed. To take Sir Tywin's place as master of ships, Sir Otto looked to the Iron Islands, dispatching a raven for Dalton Greyjoy, the Red Kraken, the daring, bloodthirsty 16-year-old Lord Reaper of Pike, offering him the Admiralty and a seat on the council for his allegiance. The annals of the Great Council of 101 were brought forth and examined. A note was made of which lords had spoken for Viserys, and which for Rhaenys, Laena, and Laenor. The lords assembled had favoured the male claimants over the female by 20 to 1, but there were still dissenters, and those same houses were most likely to lend their support to Princess Rhaenyra should it come to war. The princess would have the Sea Snake and his fleets, Sir Otto judged, and like as not, the other lords of the Great Eastern Shore as well. Lord Bar Aemond, Massey, Celtigar, and Crab most like, perhaps even the Even Star of Tarth. All were lesser powers, save for the Velaryons. The Northmen were a much greater concern, as Winterfell had spoken for Rhaenys at Harrenhal, as had Lord Stark's bannermen, Dustin of Barrowton, and the Manderleys of White Harbour. Nor could House Arryn be relied upon, for the Eyrie was presently ruled by a woman, Lady Jane, the Maiden of the Vale, whose own rights may be called into question should Princess Rhaenyra be put aside. The greatest danger was deemed to be Storm's End. The House Baratheon had always been a staunch in support of the claims of Princess Rhaenys and her children. The old Lord Bourmont had died. His son Boros was even more belligerent than his father, and the lesser Stormlords would surely follow wherever he led. Then we must see that he leads them to our king, Alicent declared, whereupon she sent for her second son. Thus, it was not a raven that took flight for Storm's End, but Vhagar, oldest and largest of the dragons of Westeros. On her back rode Prince Aemond Targaryen, with a sapphire in place of his missing eye. Your purpose is to win the hand of one of Lord Baratheon's daughters, his grandsire Sir Otto told him, before he flew. Any of the 4 will do. Woo her and wed her, and Lord Boros will deliver the Stormlands for your brother. Fail, I will not fail, Aemond blasted. Aegon will have the Stormlands, and I will have this girl. By the time Prince Aemond took his leave, the stink from the king's bedchamber had wafted all through Maegor's holdfast, and many wild tales of rumours were spread through the court and castle. The dungeons of the Red Keep swallowed up so many men suspected of disloyalty that even the High Septon had begun to wonder at these disappearances, and sent word from the Starry Sept of Old Town asking for some of the missing. Sir Otto Hightower, as methodical a man as ever served his hand, wanted more time to make preparations, but Queen Alicent knew that they could delay no longer. Prince Aegon had grown weary of secrecy. I am king or not, he demanded of his mother. If I am king, then crown me. The bells began to ring on the 10th day of the 3rd moon of 129 AC, tolling the end of a reign. Grand Maester Orwell was the last allowed to send forth his ravens, and the black birds took to the air by hundreds, spreading word of Aegon's ascension to every far corner of the realm. The Silent Sisters were sent forth to prepare the corpse for burning, and riders were sent forth on pale horses to spread the word to the people of King's Landing, crying, King Viserys is dead. Long live King Aegon. Hearing the cries, Monkern writes, some wept, while others cheered. Most of the small folk stared in silence, confused and weary, and now and again a voice cried out, Long live our queen. Meanwhile, hurried preparations were being made for the coronation. The Dragon Pit was chosen as the site. Under its mighty dome were stone benches sufficient to seat 80,000, and the pit's thick walls, strong roof, and towering bronze door made it defensible should traitors attempt to disrupt the ceremony. On the appointed day, Sir Criston Cole placed an iron and ruby crown of Aegon the Conqueror upon the brow of the eldest son of King Viserys and Queen Alicent, claiming him Aegon of House Targaryen, second of his name, King of the Andals, the Rhoynar, and the First Men, Lord of the 7 Kingdoms and Protector of the Realm. His mother, Queen Alicent, beloved of the small folk, placed her own crown upon the head of her daughter, Helena. Aegon's wife and sister, the mother bent before the daughter, bowed her head and said, My queen. How many came to see the crowning remains a matter of dispute. Grand Maester Munking, drawing upon Orwell, tells us that more than 100,000 small folk jammed into the dragon pit, their cheers so loud they shook the walls. Whilst Mushroom says that the stone benches were half filled, with High Septon in Old Town, too old and frail to journey to King's Landing, they failed to set in Eustace to anoint King Aegon's brow with holy oils. A few of those in attendance with sharper eyes than most might have noticed there were but 4 white cloaks in attendance of the new king, not 5, as henceforth Aegon II had suffered the first defection the night before, when Sir Stephen Darkland of the Kingsguard had slipped from the city with his squire, 2 stewards and 4 guardsmen. Under the cover of darkness they made their way out postern gate, where a fisherman's skiff awaited to take them to Dragonstone. They brought with them a stolen crown, a band of yellow gold ornate with 7 gems of different colours. This is the crown King Viserys had worn, and the old king Jaehaerys before him. Prince Aegon had decided to wear the iron and ruby crown of his namesake. Queen Alicent had ordered Viserys' crown locked away, but the steward entrusted with the task had made off with it instead. After the coronation, the remaining Kingsguard escorted Aegon to his mount, a splendid creature with glimmering gold scales and pale pink wings. Sunfire was the name given to the dragon of the Golden Dawn. Munkin tells us they flew thrice around the city before landing inside the walls of the Red Keep. Sir Eric Cargill led his grace to the torchlit throne room. Aegon II mounted the steps of the Iron Throne before 1,000 lords and knights. Shouts rang throughout the hall. Whilst Aegon II was crowned, on Dragonstone, no cheers were heard. Instead, screams echoed through the halls and stairwells of Sea Dragon Tower, down from the Queen's apartments, where Rhaenyra Targaryen strained and shuddered in her 3rd day of labour. The child had not been due for another month, but the tidings from King's Landing had driven the princess into a black fury, and her rage seemed to bring on the birth, as if the baby inside her was angry too, and fighting to get out. The princess shrieked and cursed all through her labour, calling down the wrath of the gods upon her half-brothers and their mother, and detailing the torment she would inflict upon them before she would let them die. She cursed the child inside her too, Mushroom tells us, clawing at her swollen belly as Maester Geraldus and her midwife tried to restrain her. When the baby was at last born, she proved to be indeed a monster, a stillborn girl, twisted and malformed, a hole in her chest where her heart should have been, and a stubby, scaled tail. Also Mushroom describes. The dwarf tells us it was he who carried the little thing to the yard for burning. The dead girl had been named Visenya, Princess Rhaenyra announced the next day. When milk with a poppy had blunted the edge of her pain. She was my only daughter, and they killed her. They stole my crown and murdered my daughter, and they shall answer for it. And so the dance began, as the princess called a council of her own. The Black Council, the true telling, names the gathering on Dragonstone. Rhaenyra herself presided, seated between her uncle and her husband, Prince Daemon, and her trusted counsellor, Maester Geraldus. Her 3 sons were present with them, though none had reached the age of manhood. Jaehaerys was 14, Lucerys 13, and Joffrey 11. 2 Kingsguards stood with them, Sir Eric Cargill, twin to Sir Eric, and the Westerman, Sir Lorik Marbrand. 30 knights, 100 crossbowmen, and 300 men-at-arms made up the rest of the Dragonstone garrison. That had always been seen sufficient for a fortress of such strength. As an instrument of conquest, however, our army leaves something to be desired, Prince Daemon observed. A dozen lesser lords, bannermen and vassals to Dragonstone sat at the Black Council as well. Caldegar of Claw Isle, Stoughton of Rook's Rest, Massey of Stone Dance, Bar Aemon of Sharp Point, and Darklyn of Duskendale among them. But the greatest of the lords to pledge his strength to the princess was Corlys Velaryon of Driftmark. Though the sea snake had grown old, he liked to say he was clinging to life, like a drowning sailor clinging to the wreckage of a sunken ship. Maybe perhaps the 7 had preserved me for one last fight. With Lord Corlys Velaryon came his wife, Princess Rhaenys, 55, her face lean and lined, her black hair streaked with white, yet fierce and fearless she had been at the age of 22, the queen who never was. Those who sat at the Black Council counted themselves loyalists, but knew full well that King Aegon would name them traitors. Each had already received summons from King's Landing, demanding they present themselves at the Red Keep to swear oaths of loyalty to the new king. All their hosts combined could not match the power of the High Towers alone. Aegon's Greens enjoyed other advantages as well. Old Town, King's Landing and Lannisport were the largest and richest cities in the realm. All 3 were held by the Greens. Every visible symbol of legitimacy belonged to Aegon. He sat the Iron Throne. He lived in the Red Keep. He wore the Conqueror's crown. He wielded the Conqueror's sword, and had been anointed by a Septon of the Faith before the eyes of tens of thousands. Grand Maester Orwell sat in his councils, and the Lord Commander of the Kingsguard had placed a crown upon his princely head, and he was male, which in the eyes of many made him the rightful king, and his half-sister a usurper. Against all that, Rhaenyra's advantages were few. Some older lords might yet recall the oaths they had sworn when she was made Princess of Dragonstone, and named her father's heir. There had been a time when she had been well loved by the highborn and commons alike, when they had cheered for her as the realm's delight. Many a young lord and noble knight had sought for her favour then, but how many would still fight for her now that she was a woman wed, her body aged and thickened by 6 childbirths, was a question none could answer. Though her half-brother had looted their father's treasury, the princess had at her disposal the wealth of House Velaryon and the sea snake's fleets, also gave her a superiority at sea, and her consort, Prince Daemon, tried and tempered in the stepstones, had more experience of warfare than all the foes combined. Far from at least Rhaenyra had her dragons. As does Aegon, Maester Gerardus pointed out. We have more, said Princess Rhaenys, the queen who never was, who had been a dragon rider longer than all of them, and ours are larger and stronger, but for Vhagar, dragons thrive best here on Dragonstone. King Aegon has his Sunfire, a splendid beast, though young. Aemond One Eye rode Vhagar, and the peril posed by the Queen Visenya's mount could not be played down. Queen Helena's mount was Dreamfire, the dragon who had borne the old king's sister, Rhaenyra. Prince Daeron's dragon was Viserion, with her wings dark as cobalt, and her claws and crest and belly scales as bright as beaten copper. That makes 4 dragons of fighting size, said Rhaenys. Queen Helena's twins had their own dragons too, but no more than hatchlings. The usurper's youngest son, Maelor, was possessed of only an egg. Against that, Prince Daemon had Caraxes, and Princess Rhaenyra, Syrax, both huge and formidable beasts. Caraxes especially was fearsome, and no stranger to blood and fire after the stepstones. Rhaenyra's 3 sons, by Laenor Velaryon, were all dragon riders too. Vermax, Arax, and Tyrax were thriving and growing larger every day. Aegon the younger, eldest of Rhaenyra's 2 sons by Prince Daemon, commanded the young dragon Stormcloud, though he had yet to mount him. Little brother Viserys went everywhere with his egg. Princess Rhaenys' dragon, Meleys, the Red Queen, had grown lazy, but remained fearsome when roused. Prince Daemon's twins by Laena Velaryon might yet be dragon riders too. Baela's dragon, the slender pale green moon dancer, was soon to be large enough to bear the girl upon her back, and though her sister Rhaenyra's egg had hatched a broken thing that died within hours after hatching, Syrax had recently produced another clutch. One of her eggs had been given to Rhaenyra, and it was said the girl slept with it every night, prayed for a dragon to match her sister's. Moreover, 6 other dragons made their lairs at the smoky caverns of the Dragon Mount above the castle. There was Silverwing, good Queen Alysanne's mount of old; Seasmoke, the pale beast that had been the pride and passion of Sir Laenor Velaryon; hoary old Vermithor, unridden since the death of King Jaehaerys, and beneath the mountain dwelled 3 wild dragons, never claimed nor ridden by any man, living or dead. The small folk had named them Sheepstealer, Grey Ghost, and Cannibal. Find riders to master Silverwing, Vermithor, and Seasmoke, and we will have 9 dragons against Aegon's 4. Mount and fly their wild kin as well, and we will have 12, even without Stormcloud, Rhaenys pointed out. That is how we shall win this war. Lord Celtigar and Sworton agreed. Aegon the Conqueror and his sisters had proved that the knights and armies could not stand against fire and blood. Celtigar urged the princess to fly against King's Landing at once, and reduce the city to ash and bone. And how will that serve us, my lord? The sea snake demanded of him. We want to rule the city, not burn it to the ground. I will never come to that, Celtigar insisted. Usurper will have no choice but to oppose us with his own dragons. Our 9 must surely overwhelm his 4. At what cost? Princess Rhaenyra wondered. My sons would be riding 3 of those dragons, I remind you, and it would not be 9 against 4. I will not be strong enough to fly for some time yet. And who is to ride Silverwing, Vermithor, and Seasmoke? You, my lord? I hardly think so. It will be 5 against 4, and one of those 4 will be Vhagar. There is no advantage. Surprisingly, Prince Daemon agreed with his wife. In the stepstones, my enemies learned to run and hide when they saw Caraxes' wings, or heard his roar, but they had no dragons of their own. It is no easy thing for a man to be a dragon slayer, but dragons can kill dragons, and have. Any maester who's ever studied the history of Illyria can tell you that. I will not throw our dragons against the usurper unless I have no other choice. There are other ways to use them better. Then, the prince laid his own strategies before the Black Council. Rhaenyra must have a coronation of her own, to answer Aegon. Afterwards, they would send out ravens calling for the lords of the 7 kingdoms to declare their allegiances to the true queen. We must fight this war with words before we go to battle, the prince declared. The lords of the great houses held the keys to victory, Daemon insisted. Their bannermen and vassals would follow wherever they led. Aegon the usurper had won the allegiances of the Lannisters of Castle Rock, the Tyrells of Highgarden, and Lord Tyrell of Highgarden was a mauling boy in swaddling clothes, whose mother was acting as regent, but would most like align the reach with her over-mighty bannermen, the Hightowers. But the rest of the realm's great lords had yet to declare, and that was their path to victory. A big key in the wars to come was Storm's End. They will stand with us, Princess Rhaenys said to the Black Council. She was herself half a Baratheon on her mother's side, and the late Lord Bormund had always been one of her staunchest friends. Prince Daemon had good reason to hope that the Maid of the Vale might bring the Eyrie to their side as well. Aegon would surely seek the support of Pike, he judged. Only with the support of the Iron Islands could Aegon hope to surpass the strength of House Velaryon at sea. But the Iron Men were notably fickle, and Dalton Greyjoy loved blood and battle. He might easily be persuaded to support the princess. The North was too remote to be much of importance in the fight, the council judged. By the time the Starks gathered their bannermen and marched all the way down south, the war might well be over, which left only the Riverlords, a notoriously quarrelsome lot to rule over, in name at least, by House Tully Riverrun. We have friends in the Riverlands, the prince said. Not all of them dare show their colours yet. We need a place where they can gather, a toehold on the mainland, large enough to house a sizable host, and strong enough to hold against whatever forces the usurper can send against us. He showed the lords a map. Here, Harrenhal. And so it was decided. Prince Daemon would lead an assault on Harrenhal, riding Caraxes. Princess Rhaenyra would remain on Dragonstone until she had recovered her strength. The Velaryon fleet would close off the gullet, sailing forth from Dragonstone and Driftmark to block all shipping entering or leaving Blackwater Bay. We do not have the strength to take King's Landing by force, Prince Daemon said, no more than our foes could hope to capture Dragonstone. But Aegon is a green boy, and green boys are easily provoked. May perhaps we can goad him into a rash attack. The Sea Snake would command the fleet, whilst Princess Rhaenys flew overhead to keep their foes from attacking their ships with dragons. Meanwhile, ravens would go forth to Riverrun, the Eyrie and Pike, as well as Storm's End, to gain their allegiances. Then spoke up the Queen's eldest son, Jacaerys. We should bear those messages, he said. Dragons will win the lords over quicker than ravens. His brother Lucerys agreed, insisting that he and Jace were men, or near enough to make no matter. Our uncle calls us Strongs, but when the lords see us on Dragonback, they will know that for a lie. Only Targaryens ride dragon. Mushroom tells us the Sea Snake grumbled at this, insisting that the three boys were Velaryons. Yet he smiled as he said it, with pride in his voice. Even young Joffrey chimed in, offering to mount his own dragon, Tyrax, and join his brothers. But Princess Rhaenyra forbade it. Joff was but 11, but Jacaerys was 14 and Lucerys 13. Bold and handsome lads, skilled in arms, who had long served as squires. If you go as messengers and not knights, she told them. You must take no part in any fighting. Not until both boys had sworn solemn oaths upon a copy of the seven-pointed star would her grace consent to using them as her envoys. It was decided that Jace, being the older of the two, would take the longer, more dangerous task, flying to the Eyrie to treat with the Lady of the Vale, and then to White Harbour to win over Lord Manderley, and lastly to Winterfell to meet with Lord Stark. Luke's mission would be shorter and safer. He was to fly to Storm's End, where it was expected that Boros Baratheon would give him a warm welcome. A hasty coronation was held the next day. The arrival of Sir Stephen Darkland, formerly of Aegon's Kingsguard, was an occasion of much joy on Dragonstone, especially when it was learned that he and his fellow loyalists had brought them the stolen crown of King Jaehaerys the Conciliator. 300 sets of eyes looked on as Prince Daemon placed the old king's crown on the head of his wife, proclaiming her Rhaenyra of House Targaryen, first of her name, Queen of the Andals, the Rhoynar, and the First Men. The prince claimed for himself the style of Protector of the Realm, and Rhaenyra named her eldest son Jacaerys, the Prince of Dragonstone, and heir to the Iron Throne. Her first act as queen was to declare Sir Otto Hightower and Queen Alicent as rebels. As for my half-brothers and my sweet sister Helena, she announced, they have been led astray by the council of evil men. Let them come to Dragonstone, bend the knee and ask for my forgiveness, and I shall gladly spare their lives and take them back into my heart, for they are of my own blood, and no man or woman is accursed as a kinslayer. Word of Rhaenyra's coronation reached the Red Keep the next day, to the great displeasure of Aegon II. My half-sister and my uncle are guilty of high treason, the young king declared. I want them attainted. I want them arrested. Cooler heads on the Green Council wished to parley. The princess must be made to see that her cause is hopeless, Grand Maester Orwell said. Brother should not war against sister. Send me to her. That way we may talk and reach an amicable accord. Aegon would not hear of it. Septon Eustace tells us that Aegon accused the Grand Maester of disloyalty and spoke of having him thrown into the Black Cells. But when the two queens, his mother, Queen Alicent, and his wife, Queen Helena, spoke in favour of Orwell's proposal, the truculent king gave way reluctantly. So Grand Maester Orwell was dispatched across Blackwater Bay under a banner of peace, leading a retinue that included Sir Aric Cargill of the Kingsguard and Sir Gawain Hightower of the Goldcloaks, along with a score of scribes and septons, amongst them Eustace. The terms offered by the king were generous, Monkkin declared in his true telling. If the princess would acknowledge him as king and make obstinance before the Iron Throne, Aegon II would confirm her in her possession of Dragonstone and allow the island and castle to pass to her son Jacaerys upon her death. Her second son Lucerys would be recognised as the rightful heir to Driftmark and the lands and holdings of House Velaryon. Her boys by Prince Daemon, Aegon the Younger and Viserys would be given a place of honour at court, the former as the king's squire, the latter as his cupbearer. Pardons would be granted to those lords and knights who had conspired treachery. Rhaenyra heard these terms in a stony silence, then asked Orwell if he remembered her father King Viserys. "Of course, your grace," the maester answered. "Perhaps you can tell us who he named as his heir and successor," the queen said, a crown upon her head. "You, your grace," Orwell replied, and Rhaenyra nodded and said, "With your own tongue you admit I am the lawful queen. Why then do you serve my half-brother, the Pretender?" Monkkin tells us that Orwell gave a long and erudite reply, citing Andor law and the Great Council of 101. Martian claims he stammered and voided his bladder. Whichever is true, his answer did not satisfy Rhaenyra. "A Grand Maester should know the law and serve it," she told Orwell. "You are no Grand Maester, and you bring only shame and dishonour to the chain you wear." As Orwell protested feebly, Rhaenyra's knights stripped off his chain of office from his neck and forced him to his knees, while the princess bestowed the chain upon her own man, Maester Geraldus, a true and loyal servant of the realm and its laws. As she sent Orwell and the other envoys on their way, Rhaenyra said, "Tell my half-brother that I will have my throne, or I will have his head." Long after the Dance of Dragons was done, the singer, Lucien of Tarth, composed a sad ballad called "Farewell My Brother," still sung today. The song purports to relate the last meeting between Sir Eric Cargill and his twin, Sir Eric, as Orwell's party was boarding the ships that would carry them back to King's Landing. Sir Eric had sworn his shield to Aegon, Sir Eric to Rhaenyra. In this song, each brother tries to persuade the other to change his side. Failing, they exchange declarations of love and part, knowing that when they next meet, it will be as enemies. It is possible that such a farewell did indeed take place that day on Dragonstone. However, none of our key sources make mention of such. Aegon II was 22, quick to anger and slow to forgive. His half-sister's refusal to accept his rule enraged him. "I offer her an honourable peace, and the whore spat in my face," he declared. "What happens next is on our own head." What happened next was war. Aegon had been proclaimed king in the Dragon Pit, Rhaenyra queen on Dragonstone. All efforts at reconciliation have failed. The Dance of the Dragons now began in earnest. On Driftmark, the Sea Snake ship set sail from Hull and Spicetown to close the gullet, choking off trade to and from King's Landing. Soon after, Jacaerys Velaryon was flying north upon his dragon Vermax, his brother Lucerys south on Arax, while Prince Daemon flew Caraxes to the Trident. So let us now turn to Harrenhal. Though large parts of Harren the Black's great fortress was now in ruins, the castle's towering curtain walls still made it a formidable stronghold as any other in the Riverlands. But Aegon the Conqueror and his dragons had proved it vulnerable from the sky. With its lord Larys Strong away in King's Landing, the castle was lightly garrisoned. Having no wish to suffer the same fate as Harren the Black, its elderly Castellan, Sir Simon Strong, was quick to strike its banners when Caraxes lighted atop the King's Spire Tower. In addition to the castle, Prince Daemon, at a stroke, had captured the not inconsiderable wealth of House Strong and a dozen valuable hostages, amongst them Simon Strong and his grandsons. The castle's small folk became his captives as well, among them a wet nurse named Alys Rivers. Who was this woman? A serving wench who dabbled in potions and spells, says Monkkin. A woods witch claims Septon Eustace, a malign enchantress who bathed in the blood of virgins to preserve her youth, Mushroom would have us believe. But her name suggests a bastard's birth, but we know little of her father and even less of her mother. Monkkin and Eustace tell us that she was sired by Lord Lionel Strong in his callow youth, making her a natural half-sister to his sons, Harwin and Larys. But Mushroom insists that she was much older, that she was a wet nurse to both boys, perhaps even to their father a generation earlier. Though her own children had all been stillborn, the milk that flowed so abundantly from Alys Rivers had nourished countless babes born of other women at Harrenhal. Was she a true witch who lay with demons, bringing forth dead children as payment for the knowledge they gave her? A wanton who used their poisons and potions to bind men to her body and soul. Alys Rivers was at least 40 years of age during the Dance of the Dragons. that much is known. Mushroom makes her even older. All agreed that she looked younger than her years, but whether this was simply happenstance or achieved through the practice of dark arts, men continue to dispute to this day. Whatever her powers were, it seemed that Daemon Targaryen was immune to them, but little is heard of the supposed sorceress while the prince was at Harrenhal. The sudden, bloodless fall of Harren the Black seat was counted a great victory for Queen Rhaenyra, and it served as a sharp reminder of the martial powers of Prince Daemon and the power of Caraxes, the Bloodworm, and gave the queen a stronghold in the heart of Westeros to which her supporters could rally, and Rhaenyra had many such in the lands watered by the Trident. When Prince Daemon sent forth his call to arms, they rose up along the rivers, knights and men-at-arms, and humble peasants who yet remembered the realm's delight, so beloved of her father, and the way she smiled and charmed them as she made her progress through the riverlands in her youth. Hundreds and then thousands buckled on their sword belts and donned their mail, or grabbed a pitchfork or a hoe and a crude wooden shield and began to make their way to Harrenhal to fight for Viserys' little girl. The lords of the Trident, having more to lose, were not so quick to move, but soon enough they too began to throw their lot in with the queen. From the twins rode Sir Forrest Frey, the very same fool Frey who had once begged Rhaenyra's hand. Lord Samwell Blackwood, who'd once lost a duel for her favour, raised Rhaenyra's banner over Raventree. Sir Amos Bracken, who'd won that duel, followed his lord father when House Bracken declared for Aegon. The Mootons of Maidenpool, the Pipers of Pinkmaiden Castle, the Roots of Harroway, and the Darries of Darry, the Mallisters of Seaguard, and the Vances of Wayfarer's Rest, all announced their support for Rhaenyra. Peter Piper, the grizzled lord of Pinkmaiden, spoke for many when he said, "I swore her my sword. I'm older now, but not so old that I've forgotten the words I said, and it happens I still have the sword." The Lord Paramount of the Trident, Grover Tully, had been an old man even at the Great Council of 101, where he spoke for Prince Viserys. Though now failing, he was no less stubborn. He had favoured the rights of the male claimants in 101, and the years had not changed his view. Lord Grover insisted that Riverrun would fight for King Aegon, yet no such word went forth. The old lord was bedridden and would not live much longer, Riverrun's maesters declared. "I would sooner the rest of us did not die with him," declared Sir Elmo Tully, his grandson. Riverrun had no defence against dragonfire, he pointed out, and both sides in this fight rode dragons. And so, while Lord Grover was on his deathbed, Riverrun barred its gates, manned its walls, and held its silence. Meanwhile, a very different story was playing out to the east, where Jacaerys Velaryon descended upon the Eyrie on his young dragon Vermax to win the Vale of Arryn for his mother. The Maiden of the Vale, Lady Jane Arryn, was 35, 20 years his senior. Never wed, Lady Jane had reigned over the Vale since the death of her father and elder brothers at the hands of the Stonecrows of the hills. Mushroom tells us that this famous maiden was in truth a high-born harlot with an appetite for men, and gives us a salacious tale of how she offered Prince Jacaerys allegiance to the Vale only if he bedded her. Septon Eustace repeats widespread rumour that Jane Arryn preferred the intimate companionship of other women, then goes on to say it was not true. In this instance, we must be grateful for Grand Maester Munkin's true-telling, but he alone confines himself to the High Hall of the Eyrie, rather than the bedchambers. 3 times has my own kin sought to replace me, Lady Jane told the prince. My cousin Sir Arnold is wont to say that women are too soft to rule. I have him in one of my sky cells, if you would like to ask them. Your Prince Daemon used his first wife most cruelly, it is true, but notwithstanding your mother's poor taste in consort, she remains our rightful queen, and my own blood beside, and Arryn on her mother's side. In this world of men, we women must band together. The Vale and its knights shall stand with her, if her grace will grant me one request." When the prince asked what that might be, she answered, "Dragons. I have no fear of armies. Many and more have broken themselves against my bloody gate, and the Eyrie is known to be impregnable. But you had descended on us from the sky, as Queen Visenya once did during the conquest, and I was powerless to halt you. I must like feeling powerless. Send me dragon riders." And so the prince agreed, and Lady Jane knelt before him and bade her warriors to kneel, and all swore him their swords. Then on, Jacaerys soared north, crossed the Fingers and the waters of the Bight. He landed briefly at Sisterton, where Lord Borrell and Lord Sunderland pledged him the support of the 3 sisters. Then he flew on to White Harbour, where Lord Desmond Manderley met with him in his merman's court. Here the prince faced a shrewder bargainer. "White Harbour is not unsympathetic to your mother's plight," Manderley declared. "My own forebears were despoiled of their birthright when our enemies drove us into exile on these cold northern shores. When the old king visited us so long ago, he spoke of the wrong that had been done to us, and promised to make it right. In pledge of that, his grace offered the hand of his daughter, Princess Viserys, to my great-grandsire, that our 2 houses might be made one. But the girl died, and the promise was forgotten. Prince Jacaerys knew what was being asked of him. Before he left White Harbour, a compact was drawn up and signed, by the terms of which Lord Manderley's youngest daughter would be wed to the prince's brother, Joffrey, once the war was over. It was now that Jacaerys Velaryon turned his eyes further north to the Starks of Winterfell. Vermax carried Jacaerys Velaryon to Winterfell to treat with its formidable young lord, Cragan Stark. The Lord of Winterfell was 21 when Prince Jacaerys came to him in 129 AC. Cragan had come to his lordship at the age of 13. During his minority, his uncle Bernard had ruled the north as regent, but in 124 AC, Cragan turned 16, only to find his uncle slow to surrender his power. Finally, in 126, Cragan Stark rose up, imprisoned Bernard and his 3 sons, and took the rule of the north into his own hands. Soon after, he wed Lady Rhaenyra, a beloved companion since childhood, only to have her die in 128 AC, whilst giving birth to a son and heir, whom Cragan named Rickon after his father. Autumn was well advanced when the Prince of Dragonstone came to Winterfell. The snow lay deep upon the ground, and a cold wind was howling from the north, and Lord Stark was in the midst of his preparations for the coming winter, yet he gave Jacaerys a warm welcome. Snow and cold made Vermax ill-tempered, so the prince did not linger long amongst the Northmen, but many a curious tale came of this short trip. It says Cragan and Jacaerys took a liking to each other, for the boy prince reminded Lord de Winterfell of his own younger brother who had died. They drank together, hunted together, trained together, and swore an oath of brotherhood sealed in blood. This seems more credible than Septon Eustace's version of events, wherein the prince spent most of his visit attempting to persuade Lord Cragan to give up his false gods and accept the faith of the Seven. But Mushroom's account introduces a young maiden with the name of Sarah Snow. So smitten was Prince Jacaerys with this creature, bastard daughter of the late Lord Rickon Stark, that he was often found in her bed come the cold northern night. On learning that his guest had claimed the maidenhead of his bastard sister, Lord Cragan became wroth, only softened when Sarah Snow told him that the prince had taken her for his wife. They had spoken their vows in Winterfell's own godswood before a heart tree. This makes for a charming story, to be sure, but as with many of Mushroom's fables, it seems to partake more of the fool's fevered imagination than any real historical truth. Jacaerys Velaryon had been betrothed to his cousin Baelor since he was 4 and she was 2, and from all we know of his character, it seems very unlikely that he would break such a solemn agreement to protect an uncertain virtue of some half-wild northern bastard, if indeed there ever lived a Sarah Snow. This is what we do know. Cragan Stark and Jacaerys Velaryon reached an accord, and signed and sealed an agreement that came to be called the Pact of Ice and Fire. Like many such pacts, it was to be sealed with a marriage. Lord Cragan's son, Rickon, was a year old. Prince Jacaerys was yet unmarried and childless, but it was assumed that he would sire children of his own once his mother sat the Iron Throne. Under the terms of the pact, the prince's firstborn daughter would be sent north at the age of 7, to be fostered at Winterfell until such a time she was old enough to marry Lord Cragan's heir. When the Prince of Dragonstone took his dragon back into the cold autumn sky, he did so with knowledge that he had won 3 powerful lords and all their bannermen for his mother. Though his 15th name day was still half a year away, Prince Jacaerys approved himself a man and worthy heir to the Iron Throne. His younger brother's trip to Storm's End would not go as well. The tragedy that befell Lucerys Velaryon at Storm's End was never planned. The first battles in the Dance of the Dragons were fought with quills and ravens, with threats and promises. The murder of Lord Beesbury at the Green Council was not yet widely known. Most believed his lordship languishing in some dungeon, while many familiar faces were no longer seen around court. No heads appeared above the castle gates, and many still hoped that the question of succession may be resolved peacefully. But the stranger had other plans. For surely it was his dread hand behind the ill chance that brought the 2 princelings together at Storm's End, when the dragon Arax raced before the gathering storm to deliver Lucerys Velaryon to the safety of the castle yard, only to find Aemond Targaryen there before him. Boros Baratheon was a man of much different character than his father. Lord Bourmond was stone, hard and strong, and unmoving, Septon Eustace tells us. Lord Boros was the wind that raged and howled and blowed this way and that. Prince Aemond had been uncertain what sort of welcome he'd receive when he set out, for Storm's End welcomed him with feasts, hunts, and jousting. Lord Boros proved more than willing to entertain. "I have 4 daughters," he told the prince. "Choose anyone you like. Cass is the eldest, she'll be first to flower, but Floris is prettier. If it's a clever wife you want, there is Maris." Rhaenyra had taken House Baratheon for granted for too long, his lordship told Aemond. "Princess Rhaenys is kin to me and mine. Some great aunt I've never knew was married to her father, but the both of them are dead. And Rhaenyra, she's not Rhaenys, is she? He's nothing against women," Lord Boros went on to say. He loved his girls. A daughter is a precious thing, but a son, should the gods ever grant him a son, of his own blood, Storm's End would pass to him, not his sisters. Why should the Iron Throne be any different? And with that, a royal marriage is in the offering. Rhaenyra's cause was lost. She would see that, when she learned that she had lost Storm's End, he would tell her so himself. Bow down to your brother. It is for the best. His girls would fight with each other sometimes. The way girls do. They always made peace afterwards. With no record of which daughter Prince Aemond finally decided on, save that it was not Maris. Monkin writes that the prince and Lord Boris were haggling over dates and dowries on the morning of Lucerys Velaryon's appearance. Vhagar sensed his coming first. Guards walking the battlements of the castle's mighty curtained walls clutched their spears in sudden terror when she woke with a roar that shook the very foundations of Durin's defiance. Arrax quailed before the sound, we are told. Lightning was flashing to the east, and heavy rain was falling as Lucerys stepped off his dragon, his mother's message clutched in his hand. He must surely have known what Vhagar's presence meant, so it would have come as no surprise when Aemond Targaryen confronted him in the round hall before the eyes of Lord Boris, his 4 daughters, Septon and Maester, and 20 knights, guards and servants. "Look at this sad creature, my lord," Prince Aemond called out. "Little Luke Strong, the bastard." Directing himself at Luke, he said, "You are wet, bastard. It is raining. Or did you just piss yourself in fear?" Lucerys Velaryon addressed himself only to Lord Baratheon. "Lord Boris, I have brought you a message from my mother, the Queen. The Whore of Dragonstone," he means. Prince Aemond strode forward and made to snatch the letter from Lucerys' hands. But Lord Boris roared and his knights intervened, pulling the princelings apart. One brought Rhaenyra's letter to the dais, where his lordship sat upon the throne of the old Storm Kings. No man can truly know what Boris Baratheon was feeling at that moment. The accounts of those who were there differ markedly. Some say his lordship was red-faced and abashed, as a man might be if his lawful wife found him in bed with another woman. Others declared that Boris appeared to relish the moment. It pleased his vanity to have both king and queen seeking his support. Yet all the witnesses agree on what Lord Boris said and did. Never a man of letters, he handed the Queen's letter to his maester, who cracked the seal and whispered the message into his lordship's ear. A frown strode across Boris's face. He stroked his beard and scowled at Lucerys Velaryon and said, "If I do as your mother bids, which one of my daughters will you marry?" He gestured at the 4 girls. "Pick one." Prince Lucerys could only blush. "My lord, I am not free to marry," he replied. "I am betrothed to my cousin Rhaenyra." "I thought as much," Lord Boris said. "Go home, pup, and tell your mother that the Lord of Storm's End is not a dog that she can whistle up when she needs to set against their foes." Lucerys turned to take his leave, but Prince Aemond drew his sword and said, "Hold, Strong. First pay the debt you owe me." Then he tore off his eye patch and flung it to the floor to show the sapphire beneath. "You have a knife, just as you did then. Put one of your eyes out and I will let you leave. One will serve. I would not blind you." Prince Lucerys recalled his promise to his mother. "I will not fight you. I came here as an envoy, not a knight. You came here as a craven and a traitor." Prince Aemond answered, "I will have your eye or your life, Strong." At that, Boris grew uneasy. "Not here," he grumbled. "He came as an envoy. I want no blood shed beneath my roof." So his guards put themselves between the 2 princelings and escorted Lucerys Velaryon from the hall back to the castle yard where his dragon Arrax was hunched down in the rain awaiting his return. And there it might have ended, but for the girl Maris, the second-born daughter of Lord Boris, less comely than her sisters. She was angry with Aemond for preferring them to her. "Was it one of your eyes he took, or one of your balls?" Maris asked the prince, in a tone sweet as honey. "I'm so glad you chose my sister. I want a husband with all his parts." Aemond Targaryen's mouth twisted in rage, and he turned once more to Lord Boris, asking for his leave. The Lord of Storm's End shrugged and answered, "It is not for me to tell you what to do when you are not under my roof." And his knights moved aside as Prince Aemond rushed to the door. Outside, the storm was raging. Thunder rolled across the castle, the rain fell in blinding sheets, and from time to time, great bolts of blue-white lightning lit the world as bright as day. It was bad weather for flying, even for a dragon, and Arrax was struggling to stay aloft when Prince Aemond mounted Vhagar and went after him. The sky being calm, Prince Lucerys might have been able to outfly his pursuer, for Arrax was younger and swifter, and so it came to pass that the dragons met above Shipbreaker Bay. Watchers on the castle walls saw distant blasts of flame and heard a shriek cut the thunder. Then 2 beasts were locked together, lightning crackling around them. Vhagar was 5 times the size of her foe, and the hardened survivor of 100 battles. If there was a fight, it could not have lasted long. Arrax fell, broken, to be swallowed by the storm-lashed waters of the bay, his head and neck washed up beneath the cliffs below Storm's End 3 days later, to make feasts for crabs and seagulls. Mushroom claims that Prince Lucerys' corpse washed up as well, and tells us that Prince Aemond cut out his eyes and presented them to Lady Maris, but this seems excessive. Some say Vhagar snatched Lucerys off his dragon back and swallowed him whole. It has been claimed as well that the prince survived the fall, swam to safety, but lost all memory of who he was, spending the rest of his days as a simple-minded fisherman. The true tellings give these tales the respect they deserve, which is to say none. Lucerys Velaryon died with his dragon. That is undoubtedly correct. The prince was 13, his body was never found, and with his death, the War of the Ravens and Envoys and marriage pacts came to an end, and the War of Fire and Blood began in earnest.